Welcome everyone to the City Council study session. This is Monday, August 26th. And our first agenda item up tonight is public notifications, information, and direction is needed tonight on planning Planning Manager Wade Burkholder is here to present Council with the update on our public notifications process and different levels. Thank you for joining us tonight and helping us kind of learn more about this and figure out if we do want to make any changes.
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. I put in your council communication the 4 steps or 4 public notice options that the city has right now. The first being publication in the newspaper of record, which is defined as the Englewood Herald. The second is publication on the City of Englewood website. Third is mailed notice to property owners and residents within 1,000 feet of the property on which the change is requested. The fourth is a property placard requirement to be posted on the property where the change is requested. Now, on page 3 of the council communication, you see all of the application sorts that we deal with in community development, and there are different rules with regard to public notification for each one of those types of applications. You have some of the applications that will require all 4 of the notification methods that I just read to you. Those include rezonings, PUDs, major subdivisions. There are several that require simply publication and a property placard be posted. That includes conditional use permits. And then there are several that don't require any public notice methods because they're considered use by rights applications, minor subdivisions, things that meet the code as otherwise specified in terms of lot area, setbacks, densities. So those applications would not require any sort of notification at all. When I talk about the mailed notice, our mailed notice requirement is 1,000 feet from the radius around the property itself that's being requested for a change of some sort. I've put in there comparisons to other communities and what their radius notification requirements are. They range from 200 feet all the way up to 2,000 feet. So our 1,000 feet radius requirement is on the higher end for the metro area. Again, I mentioned on page 3 the listings of all the applications that we deal with. You'll see which ones require publication, mailing, and a property placard posting. You can see the check marks, and that's how we follow and know which requirements are needed in terms of the notification process. Following that, I included snippets of the UDC Title 16 that deal with some sort of property notification or notification of an application in general. I won't go through those in detail. I'll let council ask questions of any of those sections should they have any. And I just want to point out a couple more things that based on community input and council input, the Community Development Department and the Planning and Zoning Commission are processing a change to the the public notification process for administrative adjustments. Currently, administrative adjustments, an applicant just needs to go to the 4 property owners, side and side, front and back, and have them sign a letter stating they're aware of the project. We run into problems with that. People aren't home. What do you do with that note or that mailing or notification after that's completed? So it's a rather incomplete kind of one-time process. So what we're proposing through the text amendment is that anybody asking for an administrative adjustment to the code, the property would have to be posted a minimum of 30 days. so that it's a fixed set notice that's going to remain on the property so everybody can see that there's an administrative adjustment being requested at that time. So that's one change we're currently making. And the second change is on the screen or on the wall behind you. We are developing a applications map. So everything you see up here is a 2019 application. So the blue stars are all the subdivisions in the city. The green sort of box is a development review application. There's some orange stars on there, which are variance requests, and a few others. There are administrative adjustments on there, as well as appeals of decisions made either at the administrative level or the board level. There are 2 of them on there as well. So what happens is you click on one of those icons and it will pull up the information on what the application is and a description of it, whether it's been approved or denied. So this is in process. This is online currently, but there's going to be a period of refinement to this map. We're working out some of the description details to make it more straightforward. You kind of have to interpret some of the numbers and whatnot. But the idea is that any active or approved or denied application for 2019 with those categories, subdivisions, variances, administrative adjustments, and so forth, are on this map for anybody to review and click on and find more information out about the project. This map can be blown up. I don't have a scroller, but you can blow it up and see exactly where it's at in detail. So if you get a question on, well, what's going on around, Swedish Medical Hospital, you can pull it up and you'll be able to see all the subdivisions that are working, if there were any variances, et cetera, and so forth. So that's another method or another community notification process we're working on so that the public can see and understand where projects are and so forth. The bulk of this time, I just planned on answering your questions. This is a high-level overview on our part and kind of a nutshell as to how we process notifications.
Thank you. Council, tonight we want to just get some perspective on if there's some changes we'd like to see them explore beyond what you've already mentioned tonight, and any questions regarding each of them. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. In the recent past, we doubled our notification range, right? It was 500 feet and now it's 1,000 feet. Is that right?
I'm not sure when that change occurred. It would have either been, it was probably 2015.
Yeah, it's been in the last couple of years because I remember it's been since
Yeah.
I was on council and we doubled
Right.
it. So
Right.
okay, just want to. Thanks.
Councilmember Barentine.
I have a couple of questions. I can go through them really quick, or just notations for them.
Go ahead if you've got 2 quick ones.
Okay. The current ones that you have on there now, they're not being notified to anybody, the current administrative adjustments that you had on the list?
The current administrative adjustments up there were the side and rear and back property owners, so only like the 4 were notified.
Are those ones that have all complete, or is there any one that is in a current process?
Those were all completed.
Okay. And then where on the dots or squares or stars would the administrative variance that got done to not allow to go ahead and give a variance for the storage and drainage on the Kmart property, where is that?
That being a public works variance, that is not included on this map.
Okay. So until that happened, I was unaware that Public Works could just go ahead with no public process, no notification, and no discussion with council, just provide a variance. And so we need to have some discussion on whether they're going to be included in both the notification piece of this and moving it to 30 days, because obviously with the flood and infrastructure issues, people were rather upset about that. So, and then you said that the 4-back, 2 and 2 piece,
Yes,
and that you're proposing to planning and zoning right now, but they haven't approved that.
They
They're
have-
still in the process.
That's correct. Still in the process.
For that piece. Okay, thank you very much. And then, the industrial area. It would appear that 1,000 feet didn't cover enough to go ahead and hit the residential area for 316 units that are going to go in and greatly impact that neighborhood. So I would, if 1,000 feet is good and maybe in a denser area, but for that area, I mean, you had the vast majority of the residents that would be affected by that not feel that they were notified. So we have to, if we don't want to increase it for everything, maybe if we could also look at whether we would do it for certain areas depending on the density or who's being notified, so that it's just not other business owners who really don't have the impact of that additional. All right, thank you.
Others? Councilmember Cuesta?
Thank you, Mayor. One of the first things that comes up with me, and let me get to the top of the summary here. And so in the summary, there are the 4 methods of public notification: the newspaper of record, the Inglewood Herald, the city website, mailed notice to owners and residents within 1,000 feet, and the property placard posted on the property where the change is requested. The first one being the mailed notice to property owners and residents. That would be commercial and residential. That would be any business or residential citizen in the area.
That's correct, and it also includes, if there are apartment buildings, it includes the tenants. And it also would include if we, within that 1,000 feet, crossed over to, say, Littleton, we would notify Littleton residents as well.
Thank you. Do you have a method by which you recommend people gather that information?
They are required to use the county assessor website and rely on data that's not more than 30 days old. So they have to, that's to keep it as current as possible. And they provide us a notarized affidavit that these addresses were mailed to, and we also see the mailing list, the copy of the payment, after they actually mail the notice as well. So all of that is checked before it gets in front of a public hearing process.
Sure.
By staff.
Okay. On the property placard posting on the property where the change is requested, as I dug more into the rules, it mainly specifies in a conspicuous place that is above ground. And I'm paraphrasing there a little bit. So could that even be in a window on the property? It wouldn't have to necessarily be on the exterior of the house? I guess conspicuous is the area that could get subjective.
Again, staff determines where those postings need to be. If they're corner lots, we would require 2 notices, and we do not permit them to be in windows. They have to be outside, visible, clearly visible to the public.
Thank you. All 4 of these are good. I think that they're all very strong. Having said that, I think that there's more relevant ways to reach folks in the community these days as well. I would imagine a post on Nextdoor from Tony Ornaldi listing any one of these would hit 4 to 5 times more people than the Herald. Now, I realize that that is a task that the city would have to perform, as the applicant might not have access to Nextdoor in the Inglewood neighborhoods. But I really think that there should be a social media component beyond the city website. And not to say folks don't make it to the website, but I think unless you know what you're looking for, it can be a little difficult to find, and people don't just stop by the website casually. So that, to me, is the one area I'm seeing that I think is still left unchecked that could really help us cast a wider net. Thank you. Sure. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Sear, is your light on? It's hard to tell. Nope, it is off. All right. Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Are the administrative adjustments the main area where people are having issues? I mean, I got several emails from people that thought any property changes in the property itself should be noticed on the property. So are there any other things on here that could happen where neighbors would be caught off guard and not know what's going on? Not necessarily.
Well, based on the public comment I've heard, you know, there seems to be some confusion over PUDs and who was or was not notified with those applications. We are not hearing of any, say for example, subdivisions or anything like that that are considered by right. We haven't heard of any real concern over not knowing what's going on in those types of situations. But the reason we wanted to make this map is so people could see, oh, this neighborhood is seeing a lot of subdivisions, and you know, it's a way to notify people, and then they can call us further to get more detailed information. Instead of, you know, having the, you know, placards on every property, even if they're by right uses and things like that, we felt a map like this would be a good middle ground and a good way to show that information, that this activity is going on in your neighborhood, but wouldn't require, you know, the undue burden of a property owner, for example, wanting to put in a daycare. You know, they had to placard the property, but, you know, going the extra distance of 1,000 feet mailing, you know, it's that balance we're trying to find. And I think this map provides a lot of that information, at least initially, so that people can call us for more information.
So will that map be easy to find, or will they have to search the website and they might be able to find it, or they might not?
Well, right now it's on the, what is it called? City Services page or something, and it's on Maps and More. So it's listed with all the city maps, zoning maps, things like that. Now, we can always have a marker placed on the front page or something like that that takes you immediately to this. So there's ways to get it to be prominent, more so than it is now.
And also with public notices, is it possible to make sure that there is a link or something on the home page to those public notices so that people don't have to search and may or may not find it?
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sierra. And Wade, I don't know if that needs to be just a bit closer for everyone. I don't know if it's, yeah, thank you. Just, they're
So-
sensitive when you're up close, but when you're not, they can hardly.
Right.
So regarding the by right applications, do we happen to know how many of those are actually, how many of those come in a given year?
To date, we have 29 subdivisions. This time last year when we reached the number 29, we were still in May. So we've slowed down by a month and a half or so, 2 months.
As a point of information, Mayor, can you define subdivision for myself and anybody else listening when you say we were at 29 in May last year and where we are now?
Sure. What we consider in that number are minor subdivisions and administrative subdivisions. They're not including major subdivisions. So an administrative subdivision is someone who is dividing a property on historic boundary lines. So you have lots 1 and 2, you're just separating lots 1 and 2. A minor subdivision is much the same, but there might be additional needs of an easement, or, you know, they own half of this lot and half of that lot, and so they're either wanting to combine that or break it apart. Major subdivisions are not on here, mainly because we haven't had any in many, many years, but a major subdivision would require dedication of a public right-of-way, a new road, something along those sorts. So we're looking at minor and administrative subdivisions in that 29. We've had the 2 administrative adjustments, so those are in. And then
Point of information, were those both in 2019?
Yes.
Okay.
And then the variance requests all, of course, require public hearings, so they would not be the by right. As well as the appeals, there have been 2 appeals this year, and those also require public hearing and would require notification to the newspaper and so forth. So you're looking, 30 to 40 a year on average that are administrative.
Councilmember Sierra, was there anything more?
No, I think that answers it at this point. Thank you.
Member Wink?
Thank you, Mayor. So similar to what Member Questa and Mayor Pro Tem Russell asked Mr. Burkholder, is there perhaps a way that with this and maybe anything else that we want to cast a wide net for, that when we update something to this degree, we have a special feature that's temporary perhaps on the home page of the website? I know I've seen that done with regard to elections, like
Sure.
nearer to the election time, and it's always nice because it's just right there and very bright. I don't know if it's something we've considered before. I mean, it takes a little bit of extra work, but it'd be the same code basically, and
I'm
a
happy
few
to work with the
modifications.
IT department to see what
it's a
what can be done
consideration.
to do
If-
that.
It might be another way. So,
Yeah.
given we're we're a little concerned sometimes about finding things easily on our website.
Could I ask Manager Lewis if you know what the timeline is for any revisions we might be doing to our website? Is there any, I don't know if anything is in process of any overhaul at this point, but if not, maybe just these things are added now because they are always constantly being asked for and they're hard to find.
Right. Yes, we do have a website committee that I met with last week, I believe it was, and they are reviewing kind of major sections at this point. But at any time, we can make modifications, to the existing website. So if this is something that council wants to be placed more prominently on the homepage, I think that's definitely something we can do, and I'm kind of hearing some consensus, I think, tonight that we do maybe want those, like something like a public hearing, public notice button on the homepage so that people can get right to it.
Yeah.
And that could also link, take you to this map. Instead of trying to find it among other maps, have it listed with the public notices, even though some of these don't require that. We could kind of put that all on one page that was on the homepage.
That would be helpful. I want to weigh in a little bit. Thank you for putting all this together. It's really nice to see things side by side like this. Do you know if other cities are doing notification when it comes to just adjustments or waivers and appeals?
I do not know of any off the top of my head. They all typically, for those sorts of things, wouldn't require.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I've been asking around, but I've not been able to find any that are.
Right.
But that said, I would not want to ever let go of the public notice on the signs because it usually looks unusual in someone's neighborhood, especially residential neighborhoods, when that happens, and they will perk up and go, what's that? And for those who are not those that go on the website all the time or at all, I think we need to have a non-electronic format for people who are not web
Right.
seeking of information. I have been looking for, when I was in Vancouver a few weeks ago, they have notices everywhere. Oh my gosh, talk about development in residential areas. And I took some pictures of some signs of the notices, and I think I have it now. I think I know where it is. But have we looked at other ways to display information that's more inviting or appealing? They all seem to be these black and white kind of notice of. What I saw in Vancouver is bright colors and development occurring here. It was a real oh my gosh, I couldn't believe how clear it was from driving by quickly
Sure.
what it was.
Sure. I've seen, and it's primarily up to the jurisdiction, what their format and whatnot is going to be. I mean, I've seen bright yellow signs with black letters, something that really gets your attention. Ours are white with black and red. So, it's if that's something that you think would help get people to see it better, I think changing the color of the sign could be an option.
These were blue and white, and then there was some red where there were specific things, but it really was it caught my attention over and over, but partly because I was thinking about our city and how do we notice better. Mayor Pro Tem.
The only comment that I have on that is, it is the homeowner's responsibility to post those notices, and I would be very careful about doing anything that's going to cost the homeowners a lot more money, because it does cost quite a bit for the sign, just without necessarily the colors, so.
Councilmember Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. So to that comment, is there a required material that these signs must use? If we're talking about how expensive they are, I mean, is there
Yeah, there's
protocol for
generally like the chloroplast corrugated plastic type sign is what we
recommend?
see. Yeah.
Do you recommend, or
I think
is it on the
the
application?
type of sign can be any material they want, but it has to meet those color requirements
Okay.
and size requirements. So typically, that sort of material is what's least expensive
Thank
for
you.
the homeowner.
Well, perhaps there's a different kind of signage that we use for larger developments that are not just a
That's
home. Maybe something for when we're going to do multifamily. It's a little different. The company pays for those, right? It's always whoever's doing the change, whether
Right.
it's a family, single family, or whether it's a developer, or whether
Right.
it's a homeowner that's developing into duplexes. They always pay for it. Do you know what the going rate is?
I do not know.
It'd be helpful information. Mayor Pro Tem, want to follow up?
Yes, and the only reason I know this, you also have to have certain size letters.
Right.
And all of that, and we had, a year and a half ago, went before the Board of an Adjustment and Appeals, and it cost us $90 to have that sign printed.
Yep. I think some residents would like to know, though. It's the cost of maybe doing a development.
It was pretty obvious that there was a sign in our front yard.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, if it's a development, I agree, and a business, they have a lot more money and maybe it's a bigger site. But in a residential area, I mean, not only do you have to pay that $100 for the sign, it is now, I believe, $150 or $300 to go before the Board of Adjustment and Appeals. It ends up being pretty expensive.
Is that right? That's how
Yes,
much it is?
That's correct.
Okay. Councilmember Bernstein.
For the administrative adjustments, I would want it to be the same sign, because they're asking for something that right now doesn't have a public notification, not at least even close to any kind of significant neighborhood notification, and it's not a public process. So that's going to be the only piece that makes it that public process. So I don't care. They would need to, they're asking for something that they currently can't do on their property, and they're not going through a normal process where it's going to be cheaper for them just to do the sign, because they don't even have to pay the other money to go before the Board of Adjustments and Appeals, which I still don't understand when it causes that kind of grief. Maybe we need to look at the since you said there's not that many of them, I mean, I've seen another list, maybe there are, but since there's not that many of them, maybe we should just eliminate it altogether, but we can see if this piece will work. I mean, I'm willing to just do the notification rather than take away the administrative adjustment altogether, although it might be something that we need to discuss.
Got a point of information. So an administrative adjustment right now has, if someone were to come forward and say, I hear this is happening, could they register a complaint with you all?
Yes.
And,
Yes.
Okay.
However, it would just be with us.
right,
So we would consider the information they're presenting. We would, what's being said is we wouldn't take that to a larger hearing because there
Right.
isn't any.
it would be the four
Yes.
adjoining, conjoining,
Yes.
whatever. Okay. Mayor Pro Tem.
In response to Councilmember Barentine, I wasn't suggesting anything different. I do believe that they ought to pay to have the sign posted. I just wanted to say that, you know, as far as getting signs that have a lot of different colors, it makes sense in an industrial area or something like that. But for a homeowner, I think the current sign, the way we do it, is sufficient. Because it does, you have to make it big enough. It's like 20 by 24 or something
20,
like
yeah.
that. It's big enough that people would notice.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Do you have enough of some other ideas? What I'm hearing from folks is just continue to keep pushing towards making sure that the information is clear to as many people
Sure.
that are going to be impacted as possible.
Sure.
I don't know what we do with 1,000 feet when you're in a area like Sports Authority, but maybe there's a more creative way when we know that happens that residential areas will find out. In those cases, I don't think the signage was something that would have drawn anyone in to look at it.
And I really think the idea of, for maybe a PUD application, a larger sign or more signs on those types of applications might make good sense. So, I mean, we can look into that as well.
Great. Thank you. Did you have something?
Mayor, I just wanted to recap what I heard as well.
Yeah.
So in addition to considering for commercial or more major subdivisions, possibly looking at a larger or brighter signs, keep the homeowner the way it is, and then also the button on the website, move up the kind of public notices, public hearings, and possibly this development map to be easily findable on the website. Any other kind of consensus direction?
I think Member Cuesta gave an idea about posting it on Nextdoor or some other
Maybe some options
places,
for that.
some other options
Okay.
beyond.
So we'll take a look at those items.
There was one more, I think. I would like us to have a list of the administrative adjustments that are done and see if maybe this is just a better process to keep it public so that we don't have the administrative adjustments going on, and also including Public Works or any other department, because I didn't know Public Works could do it, but any department that's going ahead and giving variances to our codes and laws that has no public process, I think this council ought to discuss it, or at least we could know who can do it.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Burkholder, for coming and putting this together. Our second agenda item is short-term rentals enforcement. Planning manager, sorry, you're both here. Mr. Burkholder is here to present, to discuss short-term rentals.
And to have Eric Sampson
Eric, too, I
here,
forgot.
planner in community development. So we're here to follow up on the first study session we had a few weeks ago when we presented the actual language of the Planning and Zoning Commission's work. And we had from that meeting several questions from council that came up. We've provided some initial answers to those questions. I wanted to mention again that the actual language that Planning and Zoning Commission recommended does need to proceed to public hearing to City Council, and that's being scheduled. I think it's tentatively scheduled right now for October 7th. So that language and that public hearing will be forthcoming to you. And tonight we wanted to spend more time talking with you about enforcement of short-term rentals. We've done several demonstrations with various vendors that specialize in monitoring and compliance of short-term rentals so far. There's a third one that we're going to be speaking with later this week. And it is something that is, staff feels is the best solution if we do move forward with short-term rental regulations. But I also wanted to remind you all as well that if we do not have short-term rentals regulated or permitted, we still have 126 plus operating short-term rentals in the city right now that we will still need to go through an enforcement process with. And these third-party vendors provide you a menu of services, and one of those is to identify the operators and turn over that list to you, to the city, for the city to follow up on. So that is an option as well. So either way, we're looking at some sort of component of enforcement of short-term rentals right now, whatever way we decide to move forward. So I provided you with a PowerPoint presentation from Host Compliance that goes through sort of their nuts and bolts of how they operate. There are advantages to drafting regulations and permitting processes for short-term rentals in communities, you know, and licensing of said short-term rentals can offset most times 100% the cost of that third-party monitoring system. While if we continue to not move forward with such a vendor, you know, you could consider another full-time staff member at approximately $75,000 a year to process these and monitor and keep on top of all of the new rentals that come available. So if we did have permitting and licensing, there would likely be very little in terms of what the city would have to put in order to cover the cost of the said vendor. There are other options such as increasing the lodging tax that the city charges to cover a third-party operator without you know, much additional general fund revenue expenditures, to cover the cost. So there are various options on both sides of the table here in terms of how we want to move forward. A little bit about the third-party compliance vendors. So when an applicant or a person, a homeowner, wants to start a short-term rental, what Airbnb or VRBO or any of these sites will do is they will ask the homeowner to drop a PIN on their map. And when they drop this PIN, they don't put in their address or anything like that. The PIN generates a longitude and latitude component to where that becomes the searchable function of these websites. So what happens is once they get the lat long of the property, they can then go in and compare the pictures to, you know, the pictures on the county assessor site. They can look at number of bedrooms and compare. So that's what these third-party companies do, is they spend all their time matching that initial pinpoint to all this other data to then come up with what the actual address of the property is. And then they will generate a report on what that property is and ownership and bedrooms and et cetera, et cetera. So the host compliance is the information you have before you. They have identified 126 active short-term rental listings in the city of Englewood. They've also identified there are, I believe, 159 duplicate listings, so that an address can be listed on multiple websites, and that's what they consider to be the duplicate advertising, and that's where the number 159 comes in. So there's 126 unique listings in Englewood right now. And you can see through the PowerPoint presentation that they gave us, they come up with an extensive mapping system. They come up with a detailed property report. So they're covering as much information they can from their databases to provide that to us in order to provide us with the most detail possible, and the possibility of having to, go through municipal court with a certain applicant. All of this information is then part of the record. It's on a spreadsheet, very easily found, and so forth. So that, saves staff a lot of time in researching multiple websites. There are almost 100 different listing sites that they've identified, and they run their logarithm and find these addresses at a much quicker and easier pace than staff would. So I mentioned the menu option for these sites. The sites have mobile registration, so anybody that wants to register their short-term rental can do it online. They can submit all their documents online, including their tax documents. Taxing and lodging would be corresponding to the short-term rental itself, so we can see who's paying taxes, who's not, and that sort of thing. The address identification is what I was explaining. They will provide you a listing of the 126 addresses as they find them. There are 3 to 5%, I would say, of those address listings that they will not be able to verify. Those listings that cannot be verified, they will turn over to us, and then we'll open our own investigative case to see if we can't find the documentation we need to fill the case out as appropriate. Compliance monitoring is another menu item. They will, through their website, track each address. They will know if an address has relisted. So say a resident or a property owner is tricky and they get notice and take the ad down for a day or a week and then repost it the next week. That will be triggered in this database that they run. And we'll be able to monitor who's compliant and who's not through that system. Rental activity monitoring, that's again what I was mentioning. They're going to track each address until it goes into a compliance designation, and then that listing will still be there, and it will trigger a re-notification should that address have another listing on another site. So it's an extensive process they use to make sure everybody remains compliant and so forth. And then there's also a component to these these vendors, and that is a 24/7 hotline. There's a 1-800 hotline that can be called any time of the day or night, and a report made that there's loud music, a party, et cetera, at this address. And then it works one of two ways. That complaint would then be forwarded via email to a staff member, or there are some of these companies that are providing an outbound call immediately once they receive that notice on the 24/7 hotline. Now, our language and a lot of the different municipalities' language require a 24-hour emergency contact. So that information is on file. That information would be on file with this vendor. And if somebody calls in for a complaint on noise, that would happen, then the vendor themselves would call the 24-hour emergency contact to say, you need to go over there now, we've had a complaint. You need to address the issue. Of the 126 listings that Host Compliance found, approximately 95% of those do meet our definition of short-term rental in the ordinance. You do occasionally run into a motel that is operating or listing, their rooms on these sites, and you occasionally run into a bed and breakfast on these sites that wouldn't be required or required to follow the regulations for short-term rentals. So the majority, high majority does meet the requirement and definition under our current proposed ordinance.
Go ahead. Point of information? Is that what you're asking? Go ahead.
How do you know that they meet the requirements, 95% of them? I mean, the requirement is ownership, how long they're in, how, you know, that an owner is living in the property, that they live there for at least 6 months of the year. How in the world could they know that? I mean, I'm not even sure if the 126 for sure know that they're in Olive Inglewood unless you saw all of the addresses. But how in the world could they tell that 95% of them are in compliance with the rules as have been suggested?
Well, I'm saying the 5% are the hotels, motels, and bed and breakfast. They would be able to cross-reference address and see that it's a motel.
So about 5% might be a hotel, but not 95% are in compliance, because what you said was 95% were in compliance with the way that these rules are being suggested. That might mislead people, so I understand better. All you're talking about is 5% might be some other commercial use already.
Yeah, thanks.
All right.
What I meant was that the 95% is meeting our definition of a short-term rental, meaning they're renting rooms for less than 30 days out of their home. So that's where the 95% number is.
Okay, so they're just in compliance with that 30-day deadline.
Right, right.
Thank you, Mayor.
Oh, at what point do you want to have questions?
I'm ready for questions at this
Okay.
time. Yeah.
Great. Member Sierra?
Member Barentine actually asked the question I was going to ask in terms of what does it mean to be compliant, because not knowing whether or not that they've met the definition of 9 months ownership, or apparently 7 months now based off of this presentation, which I'll ask at a later point. But that was basically going to be the crux of my question, is just understanding what that meant to be compliant.
Okay.
Do you have anything else? No. Others, questions? And let's do one by one at this point, okay? So let's keep going. Councilmember Barentine. No, go ahead.
Sorry. The issue with Washington Street, which certainly puts enforcement as a big issue, because we have a resident that came for over a year with something that's currently illegal and couldn't get it enforced. So I'm having some concerns brought to me that if they can't get it enforced while it's illegal, how are they going to get the problems that they were encountering when it actually is legal? So the Washington units, they had, I think they were advertising up to 15 people. They were having several different contracts going, but they had it's listed as, on the assessor as a 4-bedroom, but they listed the house as 7-bedroom. So how are we going to be able to tell who's going to go and do all that research? And are those listings, like for Washington, they have a listing for the traveling nurses, they have a listing for the other party things. So they're listing the same house because they're doing all of these different deals. So how are we vetting that piece out and also making sure, because I think the 126 is too high. I've gone on the list, I've kind of looked at some things, I found some things that were actually outside of Inglewood, because the Inglewood address goes all
Sure.
the way out to DTC.
Sure.
And then kind of the multiple listing things for one house and issues, so I would kind of like to get a little bit more information, but at least for that question, you could start there.
The search that's done through their systems that they use will find the same address on multiple sites. So, you know, the nursing site is one of them, so we will be able to identify an address through multiple sites. The language is currently written is that we we will only permit one contract per house. So that is going to be, our language when it's adopted will be on file, and their logarithms will be set up to where they will look for our requirements. So if there's something showing that there's multiple listings in an address, that will be flagged, and that will be set up for, you know, a compliance letter and so forth. We also have the requirement, as proposed, that there are 2 persons per bedroom only, up to 8. So again, those requirements are going to be housed with a vendor should we go that route, and that will be set up as a criteria that they will click on, and that's what's going to be researched. So if they see something out of the ordinary, they will flag it for further review. Did that answer your question?
One of them, because most of these things happen on the weekend, so by the time Friday and Sunday comes and they're gone, how they're going to tell whether there was 8 or 15 people, I don't know. So it was the enforcement piece. I mean, you had the gal in Washington come for over a year. It's currently illegal, and she couldn't get it enforced. So her comment to me is how making it legal is going to make any of the problem that she's faced any more enforceable than when it was illegal.
Go ahead, Manager Lewis.
Mayor, Council, that's a great question, and I understand kind of the apparent logic in the question, but the fact is that when these are not regulated and there's not a system in place to regulate them and to enforce those without basically kind of having investigators that are going out and trying to book those online, hoping that and actually having to pay in most cases in order to find out the address, it's very difficult to verify the locations. And we have residents that are telling us my neighbor is having an Airbnb. But taking that complaint all the way through the court system and getting some sort of compliance out of that is a lengthy, staff-intensive process that we're currently not set up to do. Now, I have asked staff to look at nuisance problems with current Airbnbs that we know are having problems with noise or parking, after hours partying and things like that. So we can definitely do that from a nuisance standpoint, and we have the process in place to do that. What you all passing, if you choose to do so, regulations on this would do is that we would then bring these, what I believe is 2 options. One is additional staff to regulate those and enforce, and the other is the third-party compliance. So with that in place, one or those 2 options, I personally think that the third-party compliance is going to be much more effective in order to get the job done. But if you all choose one of those options, then we have the system to actually enforce that we don't currently.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I need you to clarify that, because it's my understanding, because we've already enforced this, that there is no doubt that currently short-term rentals are illegal. And we have already, in a fairly reasonable amount of time, once the process actually got going, gone ahead and enforced our laws. I mean, there is some policy issue, and I'll bring that up later, about whether people are making a decision not to enforce it, or whether people who've purchased homes have been told by the city that we're looking at it so they've bought investment homes believing that it might one day become legal, but we're not talking about that piece. It is currently illegal, and we do have an enforcement mechanism because people have been enforced on. Okay,
Correct.
thanks.
It sounds to me like what we're dealing with here is a court system process which took much longer for one entity, and I know others too, versus having a proactive researching capability of either a staff person or a third party. Council, I think we need to weigh in on this. I particularly think, regardless of whether we decide we're going to legalize short-term rentals or not, that we need to have some kind of regulating position, and I would like to see us go with the third party, partly because it separates out this accusation perhaps from citizens that someone's being favored in a neighborhood or whatever. I just think it removes it from our staff being blamed for things. But I mean, I'll go either way, but I think we need to have some very specific thing, whether we're going to put money in the budget for a regulator or not. It needs to be, we need to do it one way or the other. So, Mayor Pro Tem Russell, and then I think Member Martinez. And yours is on too.
Thank you. So one question I have on, it's question number 3, provide an example of language banning short-term rentals in the city of Englewood. And it has language here, a residential dwelling unit or any portion thereof may not be used for any short-term rental or similar lodging activity occurring for less than 30 consecutive days. So is it possible that we can have language banning short-term rentals in our city that is enforceable? I mean, I do think there are areas where short-term rentals may make sense, but not in single-family residential areas. So I guess, can we do that? That is just a question. Can we ban short-term rentals and make it enforceable?
So tonight, we're not actually talking about approving or disapproving short-term rentals. We're talking about enforcement of it either way, whenever we come up with that final decision, right? So,
So I
but maybe
can't-
you're understanding something from her question that I'm not.
So can I not ask that question tonight if we're not talking about that?
Go
If
ahead.
I may. The answer would be yes. You could still ban them, but the third-party vendor would be used to identify those that are operating so that we could then enforce the ban at those addresses. So
Okay.
And Mayor Pro Tem, what
Thank
I
you.
was
That
saying
answers my
is that
question.
either way, whichever way we go on this, I'm in favor of getting someone to enforce, because if we all decide.
That was the answer? He
yeah.
answered my question.
No, and I'm agree, I'm
Okay.
just going
Alright.
further with it, that's what I was saying.
Okay.
Is that, I agree, I
Alright.
think we need to have, regardless what we
Okay.
decide tonight.
Thank you.
I'm not sure who is next, Member Cuesta maybe.
This is being framed tonight as short-term rentals enforcement, and I think you guys just had that conversation here. However, the recommendation from staff recommends City Council provide direction on short-term rental regulations. Staff further recommends a public hearing for short-term rental regulations be scheduled for October 7th. So to me, I feel like we're pinning enforcement and the conversation of whether or not we pass it together. I see those as two separate issues. We know right here, right now, you are not allowed to have a short-term rental in Englewood. If we keep talking about the 126 we have, it almost seems that we talk about them coming into line if we pass everything. I've had several neighbors call me and say, what rules do I need to follow and what rules can I disregard that the city's not going to care if I just don't do it? You're well aware of 126, and you're having this conversation of, well, how do we add more to the city without any assurances that these 126, assuming that that's a number, and let's use that as a ballpark, that they'll come into line. And so I think that right off the bat, the premise that we're working with is that we know people are doing something wrong, and we'll maybe come up with a system to enforce it, but only after we decided not to allow it legally or not. And so I think that we're putting the cart before the horse on that. So the first thing I would like to address is just short-term rentals enforcement, is how are we going to do this? Whether or not we approve it later, to me, is secondary. We'll need enforcement regardless. That does lead me back to that October 7th recommendation for the public hearing on short-term regulations. Would that take 2 readings?
yes.
And here's where I go with that. So if we had that on October 7th, which would be, I assume, the first Monday of the month, could we have that second one the following? We're going to have an election right there, too, and my concern is that we could almost have different councils. The election is literally 1 month after that October 7th, and it concerns me where we would land that, and new members coming in and having to vote on an issue that and maybe even on the second hearing. I don't even know how that would work.
So if you keep
Go ahead.
the October 7th public hearing, the second reading of that ordinance would be the Monday prior to election. I don't remember the date, the 4th, something like that. So it would keep it under one council. But you do have a very valid point. We need to keep the public hearing. We don't want to split councils. You know what I'm saying.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Burkholder. Thank you, Mayor.
Member Quest, I think I heard something else in what you were saying, though. Can you weigh in on whether I mean, there are two separate issues, whether or not you would want to go with a third party, or,
You
I mean,
bet.
regardless of
Absolutely.
what we decide.
Yes, I think I'm leaning more towards the third party one quick thing out of what was the company's name that sent us that presentation again? And I will get to it here in our packet.
This is host compliance.
Host compliance. So they have testimonials in, I'm getting there, I assure you, I'm into their slides. Okay. This one I think just really encapsulates a lot of what I heard. And so the title of this slide, in some communities, short-term rentals have caused significant neighborhood tension. And this particular neighbor said, "We did not buy our house to be living next to a hotel. Why would you buy a home if you knew a hotel like this was operating next door? If you wanted to set up your life like this to raise a family, would you do it next to a hotel?" And that, I think, again, really encapsulates well a lot of the sentiments that I've heard from folks. And so even though this isn't changing the use, you can't go multifamily. I've had people say, it is multifamily. It's a different family every weekend at some of these STRs. So I think that there is a little bit more nuance to this than we're not changing that many families can live there simultaneously, but they can just do it end over end. You can have one after another. But yes, to answer the question, third party. Thanks.
Episodic families living there. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. Thanks for this follow-up information. I'm definitely in favor of the third-party compliance. I think it makes a lot of sense. They have the expertise and the tools and the knowledge to really know what they're doing, know what to look for, and have the systems in place to work with what we need to provide the services that we need. One of the kind of testimonials on their website says exactly one thing that is a good fill-in for us, is they don't have the full-time staff to answer the phone 24/7 to get complaints. But these people would have the kind of tools in place to make that happen. And I really like the option of, I don't know if it's this one or another one, that said it could trigger an automatic call to that person who is the emergency contact. I think that would be great, and that could resolve quickly a lot of issues that may arise. So for all those reasons and many more, I think the third party makes a whole lot of sense. Either way.
Thank you. Councilmember Berentine.
Littleton made a decision not to do this. Did they go with a third party for enforcement, or are they just continuing to enforce their?
They did not go with a third party. Theirs is complaint based, so they receive a call from a neighbor and then they process it.
Pretty
through
much
their-
how we do code right now.
Right.
Right. My concern is running into issues where we don't enforce the law, and then we go, wow, we get some report that says we have a lot of people that aren't enforcing, that are violating the law and we're not enforcing it, and then having to hire special outside people to enforce our laws. I mean, I think that's kind of a dangerous attitude to take. I mean, the issue with Jason Street for the compliance is an email, and I sent this both to the city attorney's office and to the city manager, is having a prosecutor in court say, I'm not going to go through with this because council may make it legal in the future. Oh. And so I think, and some comments that I heard from some people that invested, saying they came to the city and that they bought an investment property here, took that away from a neighbor, a home, a family that might have lived there, turned it into a short-term rental because they were being told they're looking at it, it's probably going to go through, and we haven't been enforcing it. So I think we kind of, to Councilmember Cuesta's point, we kind of created the problem, and now we're going to pay for an outside entity to go ahead and enforce the laws that we should have been enforcing. And I see that kind of being not necessarily a great way to go forward with things.
Sure.
I'm also concerned with if once it's illegal and they clean it up, I mean, if we even went with a third party to do this, once they clean up eventually they should clean up the 126.
Correct.
You would think that, people go, whoa, they're enforcing now, I'm not going to go do that in Inglewood. Then how would we make the determination so that we don't always have this other entity around that's doing our enforcement that we probably should have been doing all along?
Well, and if I may, I think City Manager Lewis made a good point when he said the third-party vendor is going to be much more effective and efficient in terms of identifying where our violators are. The staff, we just don't have the ability to search up to 100 websites and correspond that back to county assessor records and whatnot. So, I mean, It's a very good question and, valid, but I think the third-party vendor will help us get to the end goal, and whether that's banning them or whether it's permitting some process with them, it will help us identify where they're at. Because right now, I know of maybe 5, and I only hear of where they're operating through, citizens or when they call in. So it's a matter of efficiency and effectiveness, I think.
Councilmember Sierra.
I have multiple questions. Is it okay if I ask them all? So let's start with, I guess let's start again with the third-party monitoring service, which I'm in favor with. Can you explain again how it is that they're able to identify all the properties? It doesn't sound like they're doing the manual step that we would do if it fell in our hands, which would be to go onto Airbnb and all the multiple sites, rent a property, identify the location, because then you'll get an email that tells you where it's located. Then you would have to cancel the reservation. That would be the manual process that we would have to follow if we wanted to identify where these 126 properties are. But it sounds like these third-party monitoring tools are using a different system where they're working either directly with Airbnb and providing the lat longs. But can you go through that process first?
For like the pinning and everything?
How they're getting that information to identify the 126 in Inglewood?
So they are working within those confines of those websites. So when a homeowner pins their property for an Airbnb, say, that will generate the code, the lat long, in which I'm going to use Airbnb just as an example. They will then create that lat long and be able to pinpoint where the property is, and they will be able to then compare what the homeowner is listing on Airbnb with other data sets, pictures from the assessor, pictures from Google Maps, and those sorts of things. So they're going to they're going to go through a process where they verify that address. They're going to come up with a number of bedrooms in the house, a square footage of the house, and that's all going to come together and give a certainty that that is the actual address. There are occasions where they can't, as I mentioned, with 100% accuracy find that. It's a small percentage, and then they will turn that information over to us to say, you might want to go in the neighborhood and see if you can locate these pictures to correspond with the front of the house or something. Or that is a very small percentage, but it does happen. So it's their internal reports that they generate compared with other known databases that they can then correspond pictures with properties, and Google Maps is a really valuable tool for that because they can see front of house versus what they've listed in their ad. So the PIN is the initial point, but then they're going to fill out the rest of their application, say we have X number of bedrooms, et cetera, and then we can start building on that information to find that right property.
Okay.
Couple more, and then I'm going to let Member Quest ask.
I'll ask both of them. Okay, so then how often do they refresh the data? Because obviously you would have to go in a week later to try to identify if there's 128.
It depends on the company. Some are daily, I believe, and the others are 3 to 4 times a week. So
Okay.
it is absolutely done multiple times per week.
Okay, and then I guess just a question on how, separate question. Let's say we did go ahead and pass an ordinance for short-term rentals. And what aspect of it would they enforce? Would they tell us that, would they have identification, or would they have information on who are the licensed properties? So let's say that we end up licensing 150 different properties, and then there's a report that they run that says, oh, there's actually 175. Do they tell us the 25 that are not licensed?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
We would develop our own database of our licensed addresses, and that would get compared to what they find on their end.
Member Cuesta.
I guess, now that I'm thinking a little further with the third-party compliance operator, I get to a point of, and then what? So they've identified, call it the 25 that aren't licensed. That still comes back to Inglewood, right? And then I guess to Mr. Lewis's point, it could get jammed up in the courts. It doesn't seem like that's a very straightforward process. And are they operating for months in the meantime? Meaning we're still going to have to dedicate our resources, is the impression I'm getting?
There will come a point where, yes, it will come back to the city, but they will send initial violation letters on our behalf. We will provide them the letter, and they will just fill in the information as needed. At that point, they will track, as I mentioned, to see if they've taken the ad down, if they're not taking the ad down, or if it reappears at some point in the future. And they will send a follow-up letter if it doesn't come down on our behalf. But at that point, yes, it does come back to us to process through our municipal court system. And as I understand, yes, they are permitted to operate until the court decides otherwise. I'd have to defer. No? Okay. Okay.
Well, I guess my follow-up question would go to you, City Attorney. So we've discussed hypothetical that we pass it. The hypothetical now, it seems that it's already not permitted. However, we put in some more explicit language that just totally clears it black and white. This is not permitted in the city. I've been on council almost 2 years now. I've never had to ask this question. Does council is it within council's purview to also set up the fines that might be associated that to streamline this process? Maybe there's somebody that's been a good operator. They were doing it outside the boundaries of what's allowed in the city, but they weren't really a trouble, residents call it. And we just take whatever actions is necessary. They discontinue the practice. Let's say there's somebody that they just egregiously violate this rule over and over. I think the Washington Street is a good example. Can we set stricter limits, fines on those operators that I think are very detrimental to neighborhoods? And just somehow streamline those cases so that they get dealt with faster and they're not operating in the meantime, and so that people know that Inglewood is serious about this. If you're going to violate this policy, that there's going to be consequences.
I'm going to give you a short answer.
Sure.
The short answer is yes, but it's actually a little bit more complicated because you're asking an Eighth Amendment to the Constitution question. So I can give you a longer answer, but I don't think you want that right this moment. When you make something unlawful, you already have the general penalty clause, which says, and the vast majority of the code violations are covered by the general penalty clause, but you can also have a range for a specific offense, and the general penalty clause allows for that. But under the Eighth Amendment, the judge has to have the discretion to treat each individual who comes before him and her based on the facts of their case. So it's usually, it's going to be set up as a range of a minimum of $100 and a maximum of $2,900 or however that might be set up. So that is possible. The other thing, and these are follow-up questions, is there's confusion about what an STR is within the city. Under the current code, an STR, a short-term rental, is a property being rented for 30 days or less. Generally for 30 days or less. So like the nurse's website, those are typically not 30 days or less. They wouldn't come in under our zoning code, which means that they are regular rentals. So we've got rentals in this city that the neighborhoods perceive as short-term rentals, but by our code they aren't. So one of the other issues is, do you pass regulations for those properties that are actually in compliance and then make it illegal or have more forceful language about those properties that are doing short-term rentals where it is currently not legal? So there's actually a broad range of responses here.
Sure. I appreciate the options you've outlined there. Now, to speak to the nurses scenario, the way that that's been explained to me isn't so much that it's less than 30 days, it's that there's 5 different unrelated folks in one house, which then constitutes an apartment, in, for instance, an R1C zoning, is at least the complaint that I've heard from some folks in the neighborhood.
I'm going to let the zoning code folks follow up with that.
And, right, an STR is for a one-party contract up to 8 people. So if you're on that site and having 5 separate contracts, even being a nursing site or whatever, you would still not be in compliance with our short-term rental.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. I have a couple of things I wanted to ask and also a couple comments. There are some properties that I know that I called in on because I had complaints. This was probably 3 or 4 years ago that our staff went out to and explained to them that less than 30 days is a short-term rental and it's not allowed in this neighborhood. So what they did is go back on to a site and they just did 1 per month and had it be 32 days. And the short-term person could rent it for whatever part of that month they wanted to. So it was bypassing this law. So if that continues to happen, there's not been a party house with it. It's just bothersome to some of the.
Mayor, real quick, could you explain that one more time? I'm not sure if
Well,
I followed your example, the 32
A
days.
short-term rental is under 30 days. So they posted it as a 31-day or 32-day rental. But they would allow people to, maybe come for 2 weeks during that time, but they'd pay for whatever time they wanted. It was a way to work around the rules, basically. It's pretty ingenious in some ways, right? So when we're talking about enforcement on this level, the question then I ask myself is, well, okay, if we ban it, which we can do, and we have to have that conversation yet, are we going to expect our staff to be sleuthing out that kind of an Airbnb? If we are, if that's our expectation, and it sounds like some of the folks here, as well as that come forward, want us to be enforcing it every single time it comes up, that takes a lot of extra time and personnel. So if that's our expectation, then I say let's go with a third party. It'll fit for us for either side. If, on the other hand, we want to go like Littleton, we ban it. They did look at companies, but they basically decided we're only going to go by complaint. We're not going to go sleuthing out the 126 and try and close them all down just on principle. Therefore, they probably can do it by staff because they're only going to get 3 or 4 different homes a year that have complaints. And that's what they follow up on, and it takes less staff time, but then they've got to really have some things really set on how they're going to enforce it with those folks, that it doesn't take forever and do what happened with a couple homes we've seen this last year. Is that your reading of, yeah?
Yep,
I mean, that's what I've seen in
absolutely.
a couple of other communities that have banned it.
Absolutely.
They've decided they're going to go with complaint only, and then it's a known thing. Well, but I think then we're still going to have citizens coming forward and saying, well, you knew it was a rental. Why didn't you do something about it? Well, we're not trying to find them all. We're just going by complaint.
Right.
It's the same thing with weeds. We're not always going up and down every single alley looking for every single weed because you don't have time to do that. So if we want it to be fully enforced to all 126 or 70 or whatever few then I think we're going to have to hire a staff person for it or go with a company. So to me, it doesn't matter whether we pass it or not. It depends on what the level of compliance we want everyone to fall into. So, I don't know, Member Cuesta, you still have your light on, but.
I guess, to that note, it's assuming there is a threshold of staff capacity to handle X amount that you're assuming the complaints will get. And I think that that's a variable figure at this point of what is that capacity and will we always be under that threshold? And then we have a spike of complaints and staff's behind. And I'm weary on putting this all on staff.
Yeah.
Is where I'm with the third party at this point is where I'm falling onto.
I agree. On the other hand, we could go for a year with a company and decide that, it's really, we're not having to enforce very much if one way or the other, and then we figure out we can pay for it ourselves. I don't know. Councilmember Barentine.
Two things to Councilmember Cuesta's question. I am concerned because the short-term rentals under 30 days, we already know that's illegal. We already have rules to prevent something from becoming an apartment kind of deal. No more than 3 unrelated people. So once you get more than 3 unrelated people, it's already violating the R1C. It's already violating the residential rules. And that happens whether you have the nurse stay for 6 months or whatever. You've got more than 3 unrelated people. If that house on Washington has 2 different contracts that they're doing, or even 1 contract, and you've got another nurse there, and you've got other people living there, you have more than 300 if you violate that. So we do have enforceable As to what was said earlier, you know, it bothers me about the amount of time being said about how we, to enforce this, because what happened, and maybe I didn't make it clear, was what happened, and I know Tam Williamson has an email from you that says, council's looking at this, and you were not going to enforce on Washington Street. She has that email. So we made a decision knowing that something was not within our rules, but we said we're looking at it, and so we're not going to enforce. And now we have the case on Jason Street where we have I mean, I know all the council didn't get this, but Ms. Renner talked to the Inglewood City Attorney Litigator Alex Dornick, and what she states here is that, as you stated, there is no, from what he told her, as you stated, or she's repeating back to him what he told her, as you stated, there is no disagreement that the short-term rental is illegal, but you say the neighbors will have to continue to deal with the impacts. The impacts, let me see here where I put that at. Well, maybe I didn't finish it. The impacts to the neighborhood. And then I asked both the city manager and city attorney, because I'm not aware of any power or authority on the part of the city of Inglewood or the city council to allow enforcement to be put on hold while any issue is under consideration. We were hardly able to go ahead and go 55 on Santa Fe until they actually changed the signs and moved it. So hearing that they were going to raise the speed limit to 55, it didn't make the cops not enforce it. So, and this came under the time that we were doing the sex offender residency restrictions. We asked for a moratorium at that time, and we were told very clearly that we could not stop enforcement of our current laws. And our current laws say no more than 3 unrelated people, and it says not under 30 days. So that's where it's coming to people to say, we already have a problem, and we have the city complicit in not enforcing it right now, saying just put up with it until somebody else decides. Not that it isn't illegal, but that they're just not gonna, because they go, maybe something will change in the future. So if we can't enforce it now, while it is illegal, how are we going to make a bunch of other rules that just mucks it up more and try to enforce it? I don't see a third party to being able to do that. It's not the court that's having the problem. It's like we just don't have the middle piece of even trying to enforce it to bring it to the court. So I'm a little confused on how we think a third party is going to help that, because we're still going to end up having more. If we have a third party enforcing it, all of a sudden they're going to be looking at 126. That is going to jam it up, to Councilmember Cuesta's point, because even whether they send out 1 notice or 2 notices, it's going to end up coming back to the court. So even if we make this illegal, we're still going to have to, they would still have this groundswell of these cases coming forward. I mean, I'm not sure how much that's going to help us. Should we at least try to look at maybe having some additional staff or identifying that, because what we would be creating is extra officers out there going, here, I found the perpetrators, go and do this, and it would actually jam it up. Or whether doing something like Littleton, where we were just dealing with the issues as they were coming up and trying to make sure that we had some penalties and fines in there. I would like to see that kind of vetted out a little bit more. And some of that just comes from the idea of vetting out. You said 95% were compliant with what we would want to do, and then we realized it's only 5%. So I don't know. I would like to know how many they think they would bring forward right away if we did make it illegal, how much of a problem we might be creating for ourselves with them doing it all in kind of bulk at once like that if we made it illegal.
Manager Burkholder, do you want to respond to any? There's a number of different things there, but.
You know, yes, at the onset, it would be a heavier load to process if We had to take them all through municipal court and whatnot. But the decision will have been made, I think, to the city's decision not to incorporate these uses, and it would be banned. So there would not be, and I don't want to speak for the municipal court or judge or anything, there would not be this, well, if, and I don't know if this was said by them or not, but if they say that, you know, we're not going to do anything until the city decides one way or the other, there wouldn't be that, because the decision would be made that we're going to ban them, for example. So initially, yes, it would be an increased load on the system, but I think we're going to have that either way, whether we permit them and license them or whether we do not. So I think the real benefit to a third party is that we're actually identifying the addresses up front. We know where we're going to be working, we know who we're going to be talking to, versus somehow going around and looking, you know, at who's going in and out of the house and what the frequency is of that, and, you know, trying to get statements from neighbors. So I know that was only one of the
Mayor, I can ask a really quick question that I just realized will clear this up for me a lot. When you wrote that email and told Tam Williamson that we were not going to enforce on the Washington Street, was that under your authority, or did you discuss that with somebody else and get permission that you were not going to enforce that on that property at that time?
I had discussions with others, yes.
I'd love it if you would disclose to me who gave you the authority to go ahead and send that email to say you weren't going to enforce.
I spoke with the city attorney's office.
Thank you very much. Okay.
All right, yeah, I'm going to have the manager speak, and then, did you have one more?
Yes,
Okay.
and it's a final.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I have a much better picture of kind of the issue than I did before coming in here, so thank you for the discussion tonight. What I want to point out is that the fears of selective enforcement are extremely legitimate, and I don't ever want the citizenry to not have confidence that we're going to enforce the laws consistently. And so Councilmember Barentine's point is very well taken. It is a matter of priorities in terms of how we enforce. So if we have, in fact, which it sounds like we have successfully prosecuted and shut down a handful based on complaints of Airbnbs, that is a testament to the city attorney's office and the court, our judge, because cities have had extreme difficulty in doing that. You may remember Channel 9 doing a big story on an enforcement that the city of Denver did on one. That is so newsworthy because cities are not able to typically do that. So the fact that Inglewood has is very commendable. What I will say is that if it moves out of the city attorney's office into where it really should be, into a more code enforcement, police, or planning, zoning enforcement kind of regulatory space, I do not think we have the staff capacity to do that. Certainly not for the 126, possibly for on a complaint basis only. But I would just point out that's still selective enforcement. If we know we have 126, but we're only enforcing on the ones that are complained on, I still would accept the argument people could make that we are still selectively enforcing. So I think we have a majority, at least, who want the third-party compliance. We can start that now in the band and get them going after an RFP process and selecting a company to start enforcing the ban. But again, I think that probably I would like to have council direction, because if the decision on whether or not to have some regulations around these goes forward in October, it doesn't make a lot of sense to start enforcing now, because the cases would still be in the court system when you potentially legalized or said you want to keep the ban in place. So that's why it is a little bit tricky for staff to try to move forward with enforcement if we know there's a pending date for, a decision to be made on whether or not to regulate these and potentially allow them. It doesn't make a lot of sense to spend a lot of resources on that if in the middle of the case we're going to legalize. And I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Councilmember Cuesta?
You bet. So going back to where, What is the third party?
Host compliance.
Going to where host compliance ends and where Inglewood begins. So they identify these 126. It sounds like you guys have some letters that they can send out on Inglewood's behalf. When would it get turned back over to Inglewood? Would that go to your department, or does that go straight to the courts? I'm trying to figure out where a bottleneck could develop if there was going to be one to staff.
It would come back to community development staff at that point, and then we would start the process with the city attorney's office or the prosecutors based on the information that third party provides us.
Understood. And so I'm sure that's case by case. Each one's going to have its own circumstances that go into it. And that to me is the concern, that all of a sudden we've got 126 that do get piled onto community development. To me, and I say this being friends with those folks over there in the legal side of it, I'm not as concerned with them getting the 126 cases all at once. I am more concerned with our staff getting it, because I think there's more labor on your guys' side. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's going to be my lingering concern, is I'm all for the third-party enforcement, and I don't mind taking a crack at all 126. I think you make a really good point that, we'll turn a blind eye to some, as long as it's not too noisy over there. And I think that puts us in a tough position to defend on potentially other matters. So I guess that was my question, is how would we deal with that? And it sounds like that's something we'd still have to work out if all of a sudden we've got 126 cases we're throwing at you folks. Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a sense of direction on this? We have a consensus to go to take a look at the third party kind of vendor and compliance people, regardless of what we decide on in the month of October into November. I think the question for me, however, is in the meantime, do we agree we are simply going to enforce based on complaint? Or do we start this company in contract as soon as we can? And maybe I don't know how long it would take for you to even get something going, and maybe it would take us till October, and that's why we wouldn't do it. Councilmember Sierra.
Well, we still don't have addresses, do we?
No, we do not.
Mm-mm. But they'd have to do the work for that if we wanted them to, yeah. Councilmember Barentine.
I think this is a much bigger policy issue, because we enforce by complaint for code enforcement too. So,
Mhm.
I mean, we've got to decide how we're going to handle things. And nobody has made the argument that it's unfair. People have a problem with the way that we handle our code enforcement, and it isn't, probably to your point, it probably isn't correct to just go ahead and do it by complaint. You enforce the law, and you've got people that are paid and hired and trained to enforce the law, and we should be doing that, and it shouldn't necessarily be by complaint. But we handle things on a larger scale this way. So I think we have to come to a decision if we're going to do this, and do it after we've identified everybody who's violating the law, that we have a certain process and procedure. Then your fairness comes into that you have a certain process and procedure. Kind of like when I first moved in Inglewood, every spring everybody got a notice about the weed in the alley. So that there's some process and procedure, and there was fairness in that. So I would like it to be consistent. So if we make a decision for this, and we're going to do it by reactively or proactively, and put the onus on the neighbors to be our eyes and ears and part of this enforcement, then that's what we already do with code enforcement. So we should kind of try to have a consistent policy, I think.
Yeah, I think what happens with this particular item, it's a new day in our lives of having something that's much more complicated to follow up and enforce than just getting someone to cut their weeds. You're talking about people renting, living in a home, some in some very different circumstances from the party folks even. I don't think it's quite that simple. So it's a new day in city management of this kind of thing, and we're dealing with a new issue.
I think what I was
so
trying
for that
to ask
reason,
for,
I am still talking.
well,
I'm still talking. I'm presiding officer, so I can
talk whenever
respond.
you want,
Yeah.
you're correct.
No, yeah, Just don't interrupt what I'm trying to, so I don't even remember what I was saying, except that this is a new day and a new issue that's going to increase your staffing needs in your department, and it's going to cost money to do it by either someone is going to do something else in trying to figure out code enforcement, or we have to buy another personnel with it. I would prefer that we do by complaint right now and investigate, which is what I was hearing from everyone else as well. I think we had a consensus for that, and we can move forward to investigate what would that company look like. We're not making a decision night to go with them. We're just simply talking about doing an RFP to figure it out.
Well, all I was asking was, could we please include that thought process in this so that we have some consistency? I think
What thought process?
of being consistent in either being proactive or reactive to the point that code isn't important. A mattress in an alley might have crammed up a drainage ditch and caused a woman to drown. So I think
Would you
that
please stop? I find that highly egregious to be keeping on saying that.
I think that the code issues
You're playing with
are
someone's life.
You're using the time to argue with me on it, and quite honestly, all I'm asking is for it to be consistent. The code issues are
We've
as much.
We've heard your position, thank you. I'm
Then-
going to end the discussion here. I think we've heard it several times tonight. We know what you mean. Thank you.
I understand you interrupting me
Proactive
again,
or
but that's
inactive?
fine.
I do not like people blaming someone's death on code enforcement not getting
I didn't-
mattresses out of it
I did
by
not.
intimation.
I did not say that.
By
I
intimation,
said-
it is there.
in your
Excuse
opin-
me,
in your
let's be done
opinion,
with it. We
and-
disagree.
And I realize you're the presiding officer and you can continue to disagree with me, but I was only making the point that code enforcement is just as important and just as serious for the health and safety of the community.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I was not
Conversation
blaming code
ended.
enforcement for that. I'm blaming us.
Would you please thank your staff for all of this? Okay, you have one more?
Is October 7th. Are we going to that is the one question here. Are we going to schedule that conversation for October 7th? It does run right up against, that would be the last vote that
We
some
do that a
council
lot
members might
every
make.
year on, I mean,
Okay.
I guess we can have a conversation about that next time, but
Okay.
there are a lot of decisions that are made right up to the end. If this council does not want to do it like that, we can certainly change it, so.
And staff could move that up, Mayor.
Move it
if you
closer?
prefer. At least one
Does it
meeting,
matter
I
to you if
can't.
it's closer?
I mean, what if we didn't have a quorum on one night? I know it's very rare that has happened, but yeah, I mean, that is as close as we can get. And let's say we didn't have a quorum one night, then you would have that, it could be a second reading pushing over to, I guess it'd be some council members, I think maybe first meeting? I don't know, I'd have to look at the calendar. Maybe not?
No, because you have to participate in the public hearing in order to vote on the issue. So if it for any reason would get held back, then the whole process would have to start over again. And staff has been looking at that. They've brought it to our attention to look at it, to start counting those dates.
Okay.
And one of the things they've suggested is if you run into a problem, could you set a special meeting just to follow up on this? So I think they'll be visiting with the city manager about options, and he'll bring those back to you.
All right, let's take a break. We need one, and
Could
then
I
we'll
ask
come
a
back.
quick question on the dates that you gave? We would be doing this on the 7th, and then we can't vote that night. So then the first vote that we could have would be on the 21st, because we cannot vote the night of a public hearing. So the first night we could vote would be the 21st.
And then the second.
And then the 4th would be the
Yes,
second.
that's exactly what we said earlier tonight.
I'm just clarifying it. I understand you're a little upset with me, but I'm just clarifying the dates.
I'm just saying that's what we said earlier tonight, that it
Okay.
fits right before the election, then the election's the next day, and that's what he's questioning about it. Is that too close? And if we all want to decide to move it and say we're going to deal with it in November or December, we could do that. But let's not make that decision now, all right? Okay, let's
Okay, I
take a
didn't
break
get
and
my
we will be back. 5 minutes if we can make it. Councilmember Sierra has to leave a little bit early, so if we could make this a very quick trip for your well-being, and then we'll come back. Yes. All right, if everyone would take their seats, let's continue on with our agenda item 4, which is our Code Enforcement Advisory Committee enabling legislation. The City Attorney Alison McKenney Brown is here to kind of talk through with us the code enforcement enabling legislation that you've been presented again.
Mayor, just real quick point that I do have to leave at 8 o'clock tonight, so I'll only be here for the next 15 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you.
The next two issues on your agenda are issues that have been in front of this body on several occasions, and I, by default, have been assigned the staff role. But I think where we're at tonight is we're bringing back the exact same information we brought back to you on previous occasions, and what we're looking for is council feedback at this point. Are you ready to direct staff to create an ordinance updating the CEAC enabling legislation, or are you not? And if you are wanting us to create an updated enabling legislation, is there anything specific that you would like to make sure is included, anything specifically that you would not like to see included? So I think what we're looking for at this point is just feedback on all the information that you received.
Thank you. Who'd like to kick us off? Member Martinez.
Sure. I feel like we've talked about this a lot, so I'm glad it's back and we're getting it closer to the finish line, hopefully. I am in favor of moving forward with the proposed update as it is. I think that really incorporates all of our feedback to date, so I am comfortable moving forward with the proposed update as is presented this evening.
Thank you. Councilmember Sierra.
I too am ready to move forward with this. I believe the only change that I have on the proposed update would be on 2-10-5. I do prefer the wording proposed by the committee on that section. And for the reason, to me, it just seemed a little bit clearer if we were to go down that route. But if there's any concerns with that wording, obviously I'll be happy to discuss it.
That was 2-10-5 that you wanted to change it to, okay? Member Wink?
Thanks, Mayor. I too thank you very much, Attorney Brown, McKenney Brown, for the clear and concise layout and the clear write-up before you showed us the updates. Yet again, it was really easy to see, to follow through the stages in time for which we've made adjustments to this document. I love it the way it is, and I'm ready to move forward with it. Thank you.
Councilmember Barentine, I think, well, maybe not. Your light isn't on. I thought I heard you were turning yours off. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I personally would like to move forward with the suggestions that the committee made. And I find it very troubling that no one on this council has sat on that committee, and yet they have made statements like, this is perfect, this is what the committee does. It is not. The proposed changes totally change the direction of this committee, and I believe that the committee spent some thoughtful time together going over each one of these and making suggestions, and I feel like council has ignored them and not even looked at them. I am not in favor of moving forward with the changes. This is what is incredibly troubling to me. Everyone on this council, except for Councilmember Sierra, knew that code enforcement was a problem in this city in 3 different public meetings that we had. And the committee was becoming very successful in addressing those. And then we have, we put this committee on hiatus for reasons that I believe were taken out of context And there is still a problem with the code enforcement in this city. This is a chain that went on Nextdoor over the last few days. And I'm just going to read a couple of the comments here. Just wondering if anyone else out there has noticed trash accumulating in the alleys. I'm right across from our new beautiful high school, and code enforcement allows junk vehicles, dumpsters, mattresses in the alley, which encourage rodents. They used to ticket me if my alley elm got in the way. Ha, what a discriminatory town this has become. Another comment. This has been a problem for years. If you call code enforcement, you as well get a ticket if something is wrong on your property. There is no rational reason behind it. They do not want to be called or do their job. I think us, Inglewood citizens, have figured out just not to complain because the code enforcement and police will retaliate on us citizens that try to take control of our neighborhoods. I do not think they have forgotten how they got that new police station. I have even tried calling our police community liaison, and she is a great help, but the police want to point out that she is just a liaison, not an officer. And I'll just read one more. Oh, you have hit on a sore point. There are codes regarding weeds in the city, yet many properties have weeds everywhere, both front yards and alleys. We used to get a notice if you had weeds more than 6 inches tall. Many front yards are nothing but weeds. I complained to code enforcement and to city council. I took a 6-foot weed from my alley to get to one council meeting a few years ago, and immediately one council member asked me to take it out because he's allergic. Exactly. Not only does it really look bad, many people are allergic. Still, nothing is done. We have all these beautiful and very expensive buildings, police facility, and all new schools, but so many properties have trash, even in front yards, and huge weeds everywhere. Inglewood can't be a welcoming, wholesome community when this is allowed to fester. Why do we have code enforcement? And I am incredibly troubled that this council put a committee on hiatus and changed their enabling legislation when we had a committee that was actually working. And I am not in favor of any of these changes because I think it's stripping the authority that that committee had. Thank you. I am against it.
Councilmember Berentine.
Well, you answered one of my questions, and that there was no specific stuff that you would keep in the changes at this point. Okay, then I have to agree with the Mayor Pro Tem. We've all heard, probably Councilmember Sierra heard it too. He had to get elected for the position. Code enforcement is one of the #1 problems in this community. There are over 90 responses on that one next door email. Once she puts some kind of question out there, it just explodes every time code enforcement comes up. And it seems that rather than take the message and clear up the problem, we shot the messenger, and the messenger was the code enforcement board because they were doing a good job. They were not meeting before, they were ineffectual, they were kind of pawned off, and then they got together, read the charter, read what their mission statement was, and they started to do it. And this council was punitive to them and punished them instead of fixing the problems with code enforcement. Instead of going, you can't complain about any department or bring out that they're ineffectual or that they're ineffective or that maybe they're not doing their job, or at least this community perceives that they're not doing their job. And instead of fix it, we go and punish the volunteer group that's trying to address the problems and resolve them. I appreciate that everybody wants to cheerlead for our employees and say good things about the city, but we can't turn a blind eye when things are not going right. The reason that the code enforcement was done the way it was to go ahead and take a little bit of the heat off of what our new city manager brought up was that you had a board of citizens that were bringing up issues and trying to guide code enforcement so that it didn't look like it was something that the city council was doing, that there was some objectivity to it and some more community neighbor representation of it. And to take this away and start putting it back as if nothing should be brought to this board except through the administration that way instead of from the community up through this board, I think is foolish. So I'm going to have to back up the Mayor Pro Tem. I appreciate her service on this board and the work that she's done. And I appreciate the people who have served on this board. I think that we did them a huge disservice and sent a really bad message both to the community and to the staff about where we should be going. That's all I have.
Thank you. Councilmember Wink, Councilmember Cuesta, do you want to weigh in? Go ahead, Councilmember Cuesta.
Going back to the hiatus, I didn't vote for the hiatus. I think that there was language that needed to be cleaned up here, but I think there's language all across the city that could be cleaned up on various documents. So I don't want to haggle over this anymore. I think that we've had this conversation for long enough. I think that code enforcement is a hot button issue. I think it always has been. I'm sure if Nextdoor existed 10 years ago, you could throw up a post too, and it wouldn't be nothing but 90 praises. So I think that this is something that we're always fine-tuning. I do, and I'm going to put a little pressure on the city manager. I know that he's had some experience with this in his prior cities, and I think there's opportunity for improvement here, and it seems like you've got the past that can kind of get us on that direction. So I do think that let's just move forward with this. Again, I don't think there's anything that's going in this document that's going to withhold us getting code enforcement to where the citizens want it. I don't think that this is going to be a block for that. And I think a lot of it is on council, and we're going to have to work closely with the city manager and staff, but I'm prepared to move forward with it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Sierra, and then are you ready to weigh in? Oh, that's right, you did. You were very straightforward. Thank you. Councilmember Sierra.
Not on the topic, but we will be having a discussion on code enforcement coming up in the near future,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, I think is it the next study session? I think it's coming out with a report from our code folks. Yep. Sorry, Member Wink, and then Member Cuesta, you don't have anything else, okay. I would like to see this move forward too, and I'm concerned that and Member Barentine, it's sort of, you said this, that we shouldn't be taking away what we've given them and putting it back to what they were doing. And I think that's where the crux of it is for me, that we changed the focus of the committee. It may be got confused a bit in my mind as to whether they were an oversight board for code enforcement rather than an advisory committee. I greatly value the possible input of this committee and think that it can be a really strong voice for citizens in thinking about how we enforce code and policies that we want to shift to, and I hope that can continue. I think that the problems that we're seeing, some of the problems that we're seeing around lack of code enforcement probably has more to do with whether we have a strategic plan for how we go about code. And I think, and I know I've asked for that before, I'm very concerned that it's not clear to us. My hunch is that code probably does have a clear plan about how they're doing things, but it's not necessarily clear to all of us. Member Barentine and others have said, they've had their house maybe tagged or something in the past of, we're coming through for weeds. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, I remember code putting a little note on my door saying my children's tricycles were out front, and it was not a good thing because then they could be, abducted, or they'd know we have children, and therefore things like that happened. That doesn't happen anymore, and so it's just a shift in everything. So I would love to hear what the plan is from code enforcement, and then keep getting citizen input. And this is a great committee for that. So I'm fine with your 25, Councilmember Sierra, 210.5 is. I'd be fine with adding that in as is. Add that. Review processes, procedures, and administrative functions of the Code Enforcement Division. Make recommendations to the city manager or his or her designee for improvement. They've just crossed out one thing there, right? So it's not just when directed by the city manager, but they may come up with some things that we wouldn't have thought of or you wouldn't have thought of. I'm fine with that. I think that's a good change there. Councilmember Barentine.
Two things real quick. Could you clarify that you said it's 210.5? Correct. If you'd show me which, so you were putting in their wording?
That's correct. I prefer their wording proposed by committee, where they're crossing out when directed by the city manager.
Okay. And then I think I do agree with that one. to take that out, because I believe that, but the whole thing is geared toward it coming from the top down. And my concern is that this committee was started, was necessary because they wanted the community to have a voice in it, because maybe code enforcement wasn't being done. And obviously, without the oversight of the way that this committee was going, I don't think we have that accountability. And I don't think putting the accountability on the city manager and this council to get code enforced certainly hasn't been working. It's not working. So I think it's a little easier for a citizen committee, and the reason that they put in there that they wanted the citizen committee to direct code was so that there was some accountability to the citizens. And I think sometimes we're too interested in making sure that we're trying to empower our employees and uplift them rather than be realistic when things are falling short. So I still think, while I agree with that piece of it, because it at least opens it up a little bit, I think the other recommendations unfortunately hamstring them and change the intention of what this board should do. And I think it's going to make it a lot more difficult on the city manager. So if they go through with this, I'm glad you've got some experience with it so that we can see if we can move forward. But thanks for clarifying that one change.
Great. Thank you. Do you have enough direction? All right. I think we can go forward with this. I have one last question, though. There isn't anything in this, as I kind of review it again, that precludes this committee from bringing to light issues that they're seeing going on.
Absolutely not. And we're focusing on Code Enforcement Advisory Committee, but I think, I think this is a conversation when the new city manager's been here more than a few weeks that we'll actually have to have, is all of the boards and commissions are put together to be advisory to the city council, and that has to be their primary role. So if you take that out, then there's no reason to have them, and they're really relied upon. So no, the goal is, thank you. I can't hear myself tonight with my cold in my ear. But the goal is not to take that authority away. It's just to clarify those 2 or 3 issues where it seems to be there's a conflict with the charter. And then over the next, I don't know, 12, 14 months, I really think that the rest of the enabling legislation for boards and commissions needs to be reviewed for the exact same reasons, to make sure everything's brought up to date. It's just, as one of the council members said this evening, I think it was Cuesta, that we have a bunch of outdated issues in our code, and we just have to get to them a little bit faster.
Okay, great. All right. Once I think you've got some direction to bring it forward then, and we'll vote and when it's brought up. Thank you. Thanks. Have a good evening. Our last item tonight is the last agenda item is the Board and Commission Handbook. Again, City Attorney McKenney Brown is here to direct us with this to get us started.
So this is a project that started, it started before council members Cuesta and Wink started on the council, because I remember the first time we presented it was at your city council training, and you saw the first draft then. So we've been updating it, bringing it back, discussing it for all that time. The nice thing about this board and commission policy, which is different from the, for example, the Bob's Rules of Orders, is this is something that you're being asked to adopt by regular motion, which means that it's not that difficult to change if over time we start to recognize issues. And I have to warn you, I expect that after boards and commissions get to work with this for a year, they're going to be able to say, hey, this isn't working for us as well. It works great for city council, but it's not really good at the board and commission level, and you guys will be able to go back and make those changes. But right at the moment, we don't have a starting place. And I have been able to sit with the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee the last couple of months. And last week, they were bringing up various procedural issues and how does this work, and can somebody abstain, and the exact things are in this handbook. And I was really impressed with how the chair of that committee was handling it, because she was really flying by the seat of her pants and keeping the committee rolling and making sure things were procedurally happening the way everybody understood they were supposed to. So the goal of this board and commission handbook is to empower boards and commissions to know what the rules and procedures are, so that they don't get in those situations where they have to stop for 5 minutes and discuss those kinds of things. So we're really encouraging the city council to allow us to bring this back for adoption at one of the next meetings. But again, we've been discussing this for so long, I'm not going to go over the various points. I can tell you that I made 2 or 3 updates, and you'll see them in red line in one of the versions that was sent out since the last time we discussed that. And I made those updates because council noticed that there was an issue with boards and commissions, and you asked me to go back, look this up, and make those changes. So everything that you've asked me to update, I believe I've updated, and it's now back to you.
Thank you. Councilmember, want to give feedback on any of them, any adjustments we want to make? Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple of concerns about areas that I think are unconstitutional. And one of those would be on page 7 under D, but also under C, about the criminal record. The criminal record piece, is that covered in state law or the federal constitution?
No, we've actually seen, I believe it's a state law that came out of the last legislative session about when employers are allowed to ask for, or to do a criminal background check, and you're not, under the new law, you're not allowed to ask on a first interview or whatever, but before you hire somebody, you are able to. So we're seeing this a little bit more in the news. The issues with background checks, and again, as I was going back, I was looking at what some of the other cities were doing. This is a great question. No, this is not unconstitutional. But as we've begun to see groups that interact more with children, we know that a lot of churches now don't let anybody volunteer unless they've had a background check, and we've started to see just a social shift in how groups that are identified and empowered within a community are just monitored to make sure that we're not putting something out there that, unbeknownst to us, we're creating additional danger. So we don't want to get into background checking everybody who volunteers, but if somebody has an issue that is one of those 3 or 4 felony level concerns, we would do a background check just to make sure that we were not creating an additional liability for the city. So that's where we tried to draw that line.
Right, so I guess my question, and maybe hindsight, because of what happened a couple years ago, because this is in the political realm, and a lot of, like in the charter, it talks about you have to be a registered elector to serve on council or other places. Wouldn't just that language, even in the board and commission handbook, handle most of that, because anybody that's committed a felony cannot be a registered elector? So, I mean, that's just a question to maybe take the negative piece out. I don't know that we can do that. The part that I really think is maybe more unconstitutional is under D, and this is in a couple of places where it says, individuals who are in active litigation with the city or involved in a criminal matter that involves the city may be deemed to have a conflict of interest if such matter could impact such individuals' recommendations or input to the committee or the city council. Upon resolution of such matter, the conflict is deemed resolved. And maybe not so much here, but there's another place where it talks about if they're charged with something, they may need to step down. But our Constitution guarantees that we are innocent until proven guilty. So just because someone is charged with something doesn't mean that they're guilty of it.
So the first section you read had to do with civil issues, and my best example of that
Pull it up
is,
a little bit closer again.
and you're going to have to let me know if you can't hear me because it's echoing through my ears. So somebody applies to be on Planning and Zoning Commission, and they are actively suing the city because the city would not allow them to have a development. And the city is at a time when they are redoing the development section of the zoning code. It creates a conflict of interest. And it would be a situation where, do you want to appoint somebody who's actively suing the city to try to force the city to change the code, and then they get to take that back to the planning and zoning, and you can see that point. So
Right, I can see that point. But
So when it says in active litigation, it's not describing criminal, it's describing active litigation, whatever that might be. And most often, that's going to be a civil issue. But I'm hearing what you're saying. We are, the people are not, it's the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment. So people are not guilty of a crime until they've been proven guilty of a crime, but we're not trying to prove them guilty of a crime. What we're trying to say is, during the pendency of whatever this criminal allegation might be, and we listed out the most serious of those, during the pendency of these, we may not appoint you to be on a committee. If, someone wants to be on the library committee and they're being accused of some crime against some crime against a person that involves some kind of harm. Do we really want to say, well, you've been accused of some level of manslaughter, but go ahead and be on the library committee where people are bringing in their little children and all of that? It's going to create a level of concern about using the library while this is pending. So again, we were trying to come up with language that wasn't mandatory, but it allowed council to look at these situations on a case-by-case basis and make a decision on what was best for the community.
And I understand the lawsuit against the city. I understand that piece. But I also know that people can charge people with something that they never did, and just to get them removed from something too. And so how do we protect against that?
That's the 7 of you. If you look at the language, it says may be, and like I said, it's a case-by-case basis. So if you think, and let's say that they were charged by another jurisdiction with aggravated burglary or something, and you thought, no, that jurisdiction charges everybody with aggravated burglary, and it's not aggravated burglary, and we're not going to take that into consideration. That's your call. But we wanted to make it clear to people, when we developed this draft, we wanted it to be clear to people that council could take that into consideration, that you have the right to consider that and put everybody on notice. Are you mandated to? We tried to use the may language throughout that, so that when it comes down to making those individual decisions, the 7 of you make it.
Okay, so I would like that to be open discussion a little bit. One other, there's some other things, but I just want one other thing right now is on page 10 where it says multiple appointments, and it says generally no non-elected person shall serve on more than one board, commission, or committee at any one time. Anything to the contrary herein notwithstanding, an individual may be appointed to serve on 2 boards, commissions, or committees if 1, the individual applies for appointment or reappointment, 2, the individual is otherwise eligible for appointment or reappointment, and 3, no other qualified individual submits an application to one or more of the impacted boards, commissions, or committees. And I thought that the discussions that we had indicated that people definitely could, if they were on a quasi-judicial board, they could only serve on one board. We like to make it diverse so we get more people. And the other thing, there were specialty boards like some of the pension boards where you need an actuarial person. But I didn't think that this is what we agreed upon, those three things.
Is it the number of the page?
And the page number is 10, and it's called multiple appointments.
Oh, there it is, sorry, I just
okay.
was on the totally wrong.
Oh, and you know what? The pages need to be updated also because they are not in conjunction with the table of contents. I think it's because some of the corrections got moved with the table of contents, so there's that piece. So, I mean, I do have some more, but I'll go ahead and open it up. Thank you.
I'll do it, Councilmember Berentine, maybe 2 different points, and then I'll move on to Councilmember Martinez.
I appreciate your explanation of, you know, if somebody's suing the city, you wouldn't want them on the planning and zoning board. I mean, but we all have that discretion already if somebody's, I mean, because like you said, this isn't an obligation, this is a you may. It's kind of like a suggestion, but it's going to be taken as if it's literal. I think that's why it's bothering the mayor pro tem. And so the 7 of us still would have to decide on some of this, whether, you know, that particular municipality does certain things. I don't know anybody's going to do that kind of level of stuff. But if somebody was suing the city, doing a development, and wasn't getting their way or whatever, could they run for council? Would there be anything that would stop them from running for council?
No.
Okay. Then I'm kind of in the purview that we should leave some of this out because I think it makes it look as if you could, to the Mayor Pro Tem's point, I think it makes it look like you could do things to people just by accusing them of things, and that, you know, a council would misread this, that they're going to go get rid of people just for being accused of something until the litigation is done, because that's what it specifically says, is that it should be the resolution should be there, or that if somebody's accused or has some domestic violence or some serious misdemeanor involving moral turpitude, that those are things that are somewhat subjective, and I think that gets into an ability to start taking people off of boards and commissions because this council disagrees with them, and that's not what it's for. Sometimes those boards are supposed to disagree with us, and they're supposed to handle difficult situations and difficult issues, and we have at times fiercely disagreed with some of our boards and commissions. So I think this is just muddies the water when really it's always been the 7 of us. I mean, we had people that we knew were acted inappropriately. I remember John Moore and I having a discussion and making sure that somebody that we thought was probably, that we had personal knowledge of, probably wasn't a good fit to have that kind of authority in any spot, not get on a board, and we were just honest about it. So even if we adopt this, we would still have to tell somebody who still came to us and said, I don't believe I have moral turpitude problems, and we would have to sit there and go, well, we think you do. So that conversation would still happen whether these are here or not. I think this is an attempt to try and dissuade certain people from trying to be on there, but I think it opens up a real problem with people being able to do things to members on boards and commissions because they don't agree with them. And I would not want to see people start charging people or misusing the police or putting these kind of things into effect where that could happen. So
Point of information, what are we talking about?
the
I'm
same
not
issue.
I mean,
quite
it's-
sure.
it's-
but it
I
would-
mean, I'm completely
She's
lost.
giving an example of where she thinks it doesn't work,
what-
so.
I think I made it very clear at
What
the
were we
beginning that I was
discussing? Code
discussing what Mayor Pro Tem was talking about, and I'm so sorry you were confused and didn't follow along with that,
It's
but I
just
I
been
made
going
that
on,
pretty
I just
clear.
got lost.
Oh, your
Yeah.
change.
Thank you.
Are you finished, Member Berentine?
No.
Can you finish it out?
Are you on that page now? Councilmember Wee, do you see what I was talking about? Her first points on page 7. There are C, D, and E, where the city attorney gave a somewhat lengthy explanation about what she thought they were, and that they were not necessarily mandates, but they were things that council would have to, could decide, may happen, may be, but I believe that it's being written in a way that's kind of a little bit mandating it, because there's also language in there that sounds like it's mandating it. Do you see now where I'm talking about? Councilmember Wing.
Member Wink, are you asking for clarification from her, or? Okay, all right.
Okay.
Thank you, I think
So
we're
were those the
finished with
three
that.
sections you were talking about, Mayor Pro Tem? On page 7. Okay. So I would agree with that because I have a bit of a problem that what we're trying to eliminate, certainly you could end up with a council member on this board that you couldn't stop from getting on there. So I'd just like to get some of that language out of there. And on page 10, the top multiple boards section, I do agree. I think we've missed the part of making sure that we limit the quasi-judicial boards, those boards that have authority that doesn't have to come back to council, and forgot to take that out of there because that was the first issue that prompted only serving on one board. And then I do like the part that the attorney put in about if there were no other qualified people. I think that kind of tightens it up a little bit, but I do understand that you don't think that it really clarifies the quasi-judicial board, and maybe it could be a little tighter on which boards we think somebody could serve if they have a level of expertise. And that's all I have. Thank you so much, Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilor, City Attorney, I thought I read a quasi-judicial piece outside of this multiple appointments. Is it somewhere else and I can't find it, or did I dream that up?
You did not. You did not dream that up.
Okay.
Because of my small screen, I'm going back and forth between the code, so I can't tell you right where
It's
that is.
somewhere
But yes,
else in
there's a
here.
section in here specifically on quasi-judicial boards. Let me see if I can do a search on it really quick.
In the meantime, could I have Councilmember Martinez? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to City Attorney Brown for all of your work on this. I know it was a lot of work to get here, to pull all the information together. I think it really, first of all, we've been talking about this for over 2 years. We've had many discussions about it. It clearly addresses the concerns that this council has brought up on numerous occasions. It clearly addresses many concerns and questions that board and commission members have asked. So I think this is a really concise, clear way to give board and commission members a point to start from and what is expected of them and how to work through some of these issues. So I think it's great. We've worked through this for 2 years. I think it's good. Let's move forward. I'm beyond ready to move forward with this.
Thank you. Member Cuesta or Member Wink, anything?
Ready to proceed.
All right. Member Wink? Ready to move forward. Okay. Page 5. So, okay, I knew it had to be before it because it's here to, anything to the contrary here and what's notwithstanding. So what you're wanting then, Mayor Pro Tem, would be to have that embedded also in here about the quasi-judicial? Is that what you're
Right,
seeking?
because page 5 just defines what quasi-judicial is. Page multiple appointments, we made it very clear that we didn't, if you are on a quasi-judicial board, you could not be on any other board. Okay, and
This isn't what I was looking for.
so I just had a couple questions back in the charts. Let me go back here on.
While you're doing that, I would agree with that. I think it would be helpful to have the quasi-judicial in there. If I thought I read it somewhere else, though, and I'd have to go back and see it. And if it isn't there, I do think that's something that we did very clearly agree with, to have that, so that you're only serving in one quasi-judicial board. Did you find it? The chart?
Yes, on page 21, starting with, let's see, with Code Enforcement Advisory Committee meeting, it says council liaison, yes. And then, I mean, I guess that's okay. The 2 council liaison members are under the membership rather than under the liaison piece. Is it supposed to be that way, or?
Yeah. This is how it's currently written in the existing regulations. I don't guarantee that's how it's actually happening.
I think how it's actually happening is that, and when I read the enabling legislation piece, that there really actually are 7 members on that committee. And then there are staff liaisons, 3 ex officio staff liaisons and 2 council liaisons. So they were all grouped in the same area. I don't know. I read it differently than you took it on the piece of the enabling legislation. I just thought there were 2 council liaisons. We were liaisons, and the staff were not voting members. They were just there for different reasons. One staff member from the police department was there to be the interface between code and then also a recording secretary.
Yes, exactly. So there's 7 members.
Mhm.
The 3 ex officio staff members, they are non-voting,
Right.
and 2 council liaison members, non-voting.
Right.
So
Right.
that's the way it's, I tried to write that as clearly as possible, so there were only 7 voting members of that body.
Right, and I think it's always operated that way, at least since I've been on that committee. So, I mean, the council members never voted, the council liaisons.
But Mayor Pro Tem, are you saying that you think that this is confusing in the chart so that people think they might vote?
Well, in the chart, and I'm not, it says yes, 2 council liaison. I just wondered why the 2 council liaisons, you know, like in the one above, Budget Advisory Committee, yes, up to 2. I mean, I'm just wondering why the council liaisons didn't get put under the liaison piece. And that's not, it's not to live or die over. I'm not.
Oh, yeah, so what we did to put these together, and we put these together the summer of 2017. We went back and used the enabling legislation, and if the enabling legislation was really clear, like I thought it was very clear for the membership of Code Enforcement Advisory Committee, then we put that in there. But Budget Advisory Committee, it was a little less, it was a little more vague. So
Okay.
the language in this, but again, we want, some of this came from the city manager's administrative assistant who, as you know, keeps these records for us. And I several times had to go back and say, hey, why do we have a liaison? Or why is there some thought that this is a voting liaison when there's nothing in the enabling legislation to suggest that they vote? So we were going back and looking at all of the documents we could find to put this together. Again, if this is actually how things are happening, that is a secondary question.
Right, okay. So, and then one other, well, I got a few. Under the Non-Emergency Employees Retirement Board, and I'm the liaison to that, but I didn't realize that the city council member was a voting member on that board.
Yes.
Okay, so that helped me there. Then when you go over to page 23, under the Cultural Arts Commission, it says council liaison no. We have a list that has council liaison appointed there.
As I said, this is what the rules and regulations have, but exactly what's happening may not be the same. So we put this together so that council would know what the current regulations and enabling legislation, everything provides. If council wants to change those things, they can, but you don't know to change them if you don't know how they're actually written. So I didn't go back and change those to match up with what's already happening. I just followed what's already written.
Okay, so I guess that's one thing that we need to address. Another one is the firefighters pension board. I think there's also a council liaison. Is that mayor mandatory?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's not even on there, on that one.
It visually drives me crazy. Were you asking me a question or the mayor?
The firefighters pension fund
board. It says no liaison, but I think it's mayor mandatory, and the mayor's not even listed on the.
Yeah, there are several in here that I wonder where we are with these. I'm wondering if we can approve this as it is and then go back through and look at this chart and see not only where we're out of line with what's actually written versus what's practice, and then if there's anything mandated, because I know there's a couple mayor mandated things that might not be showing up.
I'm really hoping that that's what you do as a body, because I think between now and the next time that you do appointments, it would be really nice if this booklet was adopted so that you could pull it up and say, wait a second, this is showing that we don't have liaisons for every board and commission, which, council liaisons, but we in fact want to have council liaisons for every board and commission. The very first meeting that I worked with this city council, I was asked to define what a council liaison does. And so I gave my very best response on that. Some council members disagreed with that. Some council members said that's fine, at least we have a definition. But I was startled to see that we have previous councils that have adopted documents that have not provided for a council liaison. And so when you ask me, what does a council liaison do? If the document says there's not even supposed to be one, then I'm guessing too. So the nice thing about adopting a board and commission handbook is I think we're really needing a starting place, because you're asking great questions. And my answer is we haven't updated this as a city for so long. We've just drifted to what people want to have happen, but we haven't updated the documents associated with it. So there is nothing that stops you from making any change to this list at any time. Like I said, it's a motion, but at some point it really needs to happen.
So I guess one other thing along those lines is, I believe Krista has a list of all the assignments for the liaisons, and I mean, it tells the terms of the liaison, like tenure on council. So obviously she got that list from somewhere. So is it possible that you should check with her? I know what you're saying.
We've gone through all of her documents, and she's got conflicting documents as well.
Okay.
So, yeah, this chart was put together in large part based upon the documents that she's working from.
Okay, and so I'm just, we might want to look at this, because within the, within a couple months, we'll have board and commission liaison appointments too.
Yeah. Councilmember, yeah, great. So maybe what we should do follow up with that is, if we adopt this, next step would be then to go through the entire chart and see where we need to make changes. Because I think it's going to be complicated. I would rather not hold up while we have to do that.
Okay.
Councilmember Martinez?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and we've talked about all this before. All of these discussions have happened before, and it's probably just been so long a duration of time since we started talking about it that we forget. But yeah, a lot of liaisons on here say no, but we have some, but they're just in a language not required. So I think once we adopt this, we should go back each board and commission at a time and clean up that language and see if we want to have one council member or two, or clean up all the language associated with that whole group and then move forward. So it's clean and clear for everybody, and we don't have to go through all the kind of stumbling stuff that we go through each time we have a board and commission appointment. So we've had this conversation many times before.
Thank you. Councilmember Berentine.
I agree. I'm kind of surprised, we've had this conversation, like Councilmember Martinez said, many times, and so I'm kind of confused that some of those things are still cropping up, but and I can take a look at that. But I want to go back to what you had talked about before with the quasi-judicial boards, and I might have missed something here. On page 5, Mayor, did you think that it cleared it up or supported it, or
No.
did you wanted it to be
No,
more?
that I thought there was another place that actually defined, or that actually stated that you could only serve on one board if you're on a quasi-judicial board. That was the only
Okay,
one.
so this is just the
That's not-
definition of it, and then you actually were asking for it to be,
I'm agreeing with Mayor Pro Tem that we
Put
put some
it in
language
more.
in the top of page 10
okay.
that includes that agreement that I think was pretty widespread. I think everybody agreed on that, so.
All right, I just wanted to clarify what you were doing, because by the time I got to the pages, you guys all had the conversation. And I'll have to look at some of the other issues that have come up with this chart that I just realized. And I think part of it is, even when something is important like this and you're directing or encouraging people or discouraging or trying to make sure that we keep it fair and even, that sometimes many conversations are necessary to get it right. So I appreciate that we're still following through on it. Thanks.
Great. So it seems like we have enough to keep it coming forward and bring it to a regular meeting, and with that kind of one change, and then an expectation that we'd go back over the chart at another point, seems like another piece of advice, but, all right. Anybody else? Okay. Next up is council members' choice. Who would like to start tonight? All right. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. So is Trash Talk still happening on the 29th?
Mayor Pro Tem Russell, yes, it is, as far as I know.
Okay, someone called me and asked if it, because they said they thought there was some confusion. I said, you know, to look on the website, so.
Was the web confusing them, do you know?
I don't know, and maybe this person doesn't even have a computer, so I don't know that.
Okay.
And did we do a mailing for that?
I don't think there was a mailing, no.
Okay, okay, so, so that is Thursday night, 8:29, and do you know what time?
7?
Sorry, I'm pulling that up.
7?
Dorothy, do you know off the top of your head? I'm looking it up right now.
I thought it was 7, but there's 3 nights, so maybe someone could pull up all 3 and announce them tonight.
Oh,
so-
it's actually, they're all 5 to 7.
5 to 7?
Oh my gosh, they're really early, not at 7. I thought they
Okay.
started at 7.
The website says August 29th, September 26th, October 24th, all 5 to 7. We can move those
Is
back
it open
if you
house
prefer.
style?
A lot of it, there are
And
going to be
that's why?
stations around the
Okay.
room with people being able to vote, leave comments, and staff there to answer questions. It's the
Okay.
format.
All right,
Can I ask you a question about that? Are we gonna have one where it's more town hallish, because they all ask for like a town hall where everybody can hear questions and answers at the same time rather than the station thing?
turn on your mic.
Oh,
That, like, is there gonna be one like a town hall? Because every time we have these kind of station things, then people always bring up, could we have one where everybody could ask questions and hear the answers all at one time? So somebody isn't saying, that station told me this and this station told me that, and then somebody else said, no, the third night they told me something different.
It was my understanding that they were going to have several things, not just this style, but another one. Is there going to be an in-between one between that and the public hearing?
Mayor, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that
Let's find out.
offhand, but we absolutely can, particularly if that's the will of council, to do a more town hall style with everybody kind of in the room together
Yeah.
and hearing other questions. So, and we will be documenting all of the comments and questions that we get at these 3 forums. So we do want to make that information public too, but we're glad to have a more town hall style meeting as you wish.
Okay,
Continue it.
thank you. And then I have one more. When I went in to turn in my petitions this morning, and this is really the second time I have had this conversation with the city clerk, and the city may not be doing candidate profiles because of the expense. But they're talking about videos, and I'm assuming the city clerk means staff, meaning communication staff. Can you share with us on that? Because we're changing the process from what we've always done to after the fact that we've turned in petitions. And that's somewhat concerning to me.
Mayor Pro Tem, that's a great question, and I do want to clarify, we are not, that decision has not been made, and I think after talking to some of you, hearing your comments, and the city clerk did share with me some of your thoughts, I will just make the executive decision that we won't cut that. I probably am the reason for that, because I asked the question, I've never been in a city where the city produces political literature, and I actually I was questioning whether it was even proper for the city to expend tax dollars on that sort of thing. And so I think as we were looking under the cushions for savings, they said, oh, well, if you don't like that, we can, save this money here. Knowing kind of the background and the history, and as far as, that being proper, as I now know that it is, we're gonna keep that in the budget for this year.
Mean printed, here's my thing. If we're changing it, I'm okay if nobody pays for my political advertisement. I believe originally those profiles were put in the Inglewood Citizen. It wasn't a magazine that was produced 4 times a year. It was a bi-monthly little newsletter. And there was one, and we did it in-house, designated for the city council candidates totally, because it went to every home in the city. And I get that and the purpose for that. And if it is becoming, a problem to pay for it, I think that we shouldn't do anything. We shouldn't do the videos, we shouldn't do anything. We should just let the candidates take care of doing their own political thing. And I'm okay with that. That doesn't upset me, but it was a little bit upsetting to be changing in midstream. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Wink? No report. Councilmember Cuesta?
A couple things. I drove past Jason Park this week, and potentially it's been underway for a bit, but they have started the renovations there, and that's exciting. And the playground is gone, and my daughters were bummed, but I've assured them that it will be replaced. And the other one is that I went to the Duncan Park movie at the park this weekend, and there were a ton of kids there and a ton of families there, and those things are great for community. A lot of dogs. The movie was homeward bound, and a lot of dogs and puppies there too. But a really good job. And I think there's things like that in all the critical issues we discuss here that really have many differing perspectives on it. We don't always get together in the park and watch a movie, and it's fun when that stuff happens. And it reminds me of what's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez?
Yeah, just looking forward to the discussion Thursday night. I've heard from lots of folks on that topic, so looking forward to starting the formal conversations with the community.
Great. Councilmember Berentine?
I went to the movie too, and I was still surprised when the cat went over the waterfall, and all the kids were upset because they thought the cat died. I mean, they're not supposed to come off in Disney movies, but it was upsetting. A little bit of rain, and then it stopped, and so you didn't lose too much of the crowd. But it was actually a wonderful event. Everybody liked it a lot. I had to put my dog down about 8 months ago, and I was about wanting to steal some people's dogs because it was a dog-heavy event for sure, and a lot of dogs with ice cream mustaches. People were feeding their dog and feed themselves, so they're close to their dogs. I did send a request out for a mattress on the 4500 block of Bannock, and it was an illegal dump, and I got information back very quickly from code enforcement, but what they said was if the person, they did send a complaint through the web, and if they want it picked up, they should call Public Works. But the problem is that they didn't communicate that to that person. So unless they've been through that before, how are they supposed to know? So they're complaining that they haven't heard from code enforcement, that they haven't had a response. And they go, well, yeah, we got it. They should just call Public Works. Well, they kind of need to tell them to call Public Works so that they know the process and give some guidance in that, because they were on next door complaining that nothing had been done, and they just need to make sure that they're providing the information. And then the other, I had budget questions, and I had asked for it to be sent to all of council. Did it get sent to all of council? About the budget, I gave the reasons why I wanted the budget for the information on the enterprise funds. And then I sent an email and said, because the mayor made a point that only one person had asked any questions, I went back the next day rather than say anything that night, and I had submitted that information on 8/14, which would have been the Wednesday before the meeting, and it came to my attention that council didn't get that. And I was trying to, make sure that everybody understood why I was asking for information and the specific questions that I thought would be raised or potentially raised by getting that information. And so when I realized that it didn't get forwarded to council, then I thought, well, maybe I have to specifically say forward it to council so that we can all have this as part of our discussion. And then I didn't know whether it had been sent even yet.
Oh, okay, Mayor, may I?
Go ahead.
I think I see what you're saying. You're talking about the South Platte Water Renewal Partners financials?
The wastewater treatment plant, yeah?
Right, those, we did respond to you, we didn't respond to council, that those, that we're in the process of collecting that, but that is not yet complete. That was an extensive request that's actually requiring us to get information from Littleton as well. And so we have started that process. Peter, Maria, there are a number of people that are working on that request, and I did let you know about the delay, but you're right, I did not let council know. So it is gonna take us a couple of weeks more to get that.
And I appreciate that there's a delay in getting the answer. It was the questions I was asking that I thought that the mayor was asking people, so that we all were sharing the questions that we're asking, because other people may look at the questions differently or have other information. And so I would like the questions that I'm asking to be forwarded on like it was for Councilmember Sierra.
Great. I would suggest this is another example of why we need a portal for these kinds of things. And then secondly, that council, when you do want to make sure that it's a council request, that at least say that in it. So we're just as a reminder.
I did.
Great, okay.
I did.
Just missed it.
I mean,
Thank you for bringing it up, though, because it's an important
I think
question.
that was the information that I requested when we first had the presentation. I requested it again. I went back and listened to the meeting for the joint meeting, and then reminded him, Peter Van Eyck, and then I think that's when you went, and I did appreciate that he was trying to get that again. So it had been requested a couple of times, but you know, just that we're all getting the same access. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I will not be there this Thursday night. It's my wedding anniversary, but I will try and make it to the other two. This conversation about trash talk is, people are talking already. I have had so many call me, so many stop me even when I'm out on walks, say, what are we doing? And I keep telling them, come to one of those three. I would myself like to see a town hall format after we do these three gatherings of information, because I do think that there's a lot of sort of public understanding that gets pulled together in those. I think we have the time to do it. So I would be in favor of that as well.
Point of information on that. For citizens, and I know that there's a fair amount of citizens pretty heavily invested in that issue. Just so that they know, will there be differing information between the three that are currently proposed? Obviously, the town hall would be different. Would they see anything different from one to the next? They're the same.
They are the same,
Thank you.
yes.
It's just allowing 3 different nights for people to choose from. So you wouldn't have to come to all 3 of them, but you sure could if you
really know the information if you did.
or you really want to influence in some way, I guess. And kudos to the staff. I'm glad they're pulling that together. A couple things that happened last week. Last week was a major Dr. Cog week for me. On the 21st, Dr. Cog passed all of the sub-region requests for funding, and it passed after the public hearings and second readings, so it's all coming through. So we are benefiting from 3 in particular to our specific sub-region. If you don't remember what those were, I'm glad to send them back out. It was a very productive meeting. And then on the 22nd, on Thursday, I went to a day-long conference put on by DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs, on housing and homelessness. And some of the new funding that is available through the state. There's a huge amount of money that has been earmarked for different kinds of related issues to homelessness and housing. And so I'll be forwarding some things on to you all, because it could be just city initiated, but definitely there's some regional understanding. There were probably 40, maybe 60, 70 people in the room the day I went, and the day before they had to add a second one. So there are a lot of people in the metro area going there to figure out how can we access this funding and figure out what we can do. Most of it will be county driven, and there were county folks from our, Nancy Jackson was there, so that was good to see her there. And then on the 23rd and 24th, there was a Dr. Cog 2-day retreat, a workshop on vision, and we spent a fair amount of time trying to come up with some of the focus areas. Now that we've got the funding all set in place for the 80% that the subregions are doing, now we need to sort of work on what is our focus for the next couple of years. And aging is probably going to be one of the 2 or 3 top areas of focus. The woman who works with the Agency on the aging, AAA, what's AAA? Area Agency on Aging was really phenomenal against Jayla, forgetting her last name, it's hyphenated, did an outstanding job. I would love for us at some point to have her come here, and I don't know where we'd put that in. We tend to study issues that we're trying to make policy on, but it was so informative, so enlightening, the information that they, and Habitat for Humanity has done some research on our city in terms of housing. The two of them really coincide in some interesting ways. I don't know if we can find time in our future to just do a learning session around this, but our city in particular, I think we know, has a fair amount of people that are in their wisdom years and hope to be aging in place, at least I do. And whatever we can do to keep that possible, I think is something we have to consider in our policy development. And we can talk about that, whether you would like to or not, put that on a study session in the future. They're open to coming. That's it for me tonight. Next is manager's choice.
I don't have anything specific, but I do just want to ask for clarification because Councilmember Barentine raises a valid point. When there is a council request, so her council request for the financials made it into the council request form, but if there are policy questions contained within such requests, would you rather maybe during the mayor-manager meeting, because these are very much policy questions, should we raise rates? Should we be discussing tap fees? Why are Littleton's higher? Those are very much at the council level policy questions. So is that something I should bring up with maybe you guys if there's more of a policy question embedded into the council request?
Okay, so I didn't realize you did respond to it and made it a council request. I didn't hear what it was.
I only made the financial piece.
Okay.
She requested the financials and we did put that, I believe, on the council request. But I'm wondering if there's a policy question that I receive from council, do I just give that back to you all to say, do you want this on the agenda? Like a discussion of tap fees was Councilmember Barentine's question.
But
and why are the
he
rates?
was bringing that forward at his next meeting.
What,
I mean, he already
Peter, you mean?
He answered
Yeah,
that. He said-
Councilmember Barentine, if you're going to talk, use your microphone at least so the public can all hear it that are watching.
To that issue, he said he was bringing the issue back. So part of it was in the discussion from several months ago, and then in the joint meeting, and then the article that came out that, you know, claiming that they all made their 17 million on tap fees. And he said, yeah, we would have to, you know, some fairness thing or some policy thing. And I go, well, are you bringing that back? And he said that was being part of his discussion. So I was just wanting to remember that we were going to be discussing that.
Great, well, then I think you answered your own question. It sounds like that is coming back to council as part of the Platte River.
Well, that night, but
excuse
that
me,
was
that-
after the 14th. That was well after I wrote that. So,
Right.
yeah.
Great,
But
it's
that's
coming
why I
back.
wanted the
Right.
questions to be part of the discussion so that other people would know that that would be coming up. So, but yeah, but it stayed in the email, so.
Okay. Thank you for putting in council requests. I didn't realize that was the same issue. Mayor Pro Tem?
So just about the policy questions, I think the policy question should come forward in the budget discussion. And so I think that it should be, we don't necessarily have to put it on the agenda. It should be in the budget discussion itself. I mean, it sounds like that
Yes.
to me.
You know what? I don't want to start a new agenda item here tonight, but I think that's something that we probably need to ask whether or not policy discussions should be brought up during the actual approval of the budget, whether or not we're going to do that. So is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I'm
Whether we're gonna do-
suggesting we should talk about those things that she brought up, and the reason is staff has recommended some ways to raise revenue. Those are suggestions also that would raise revenue, and I believe that we should discuss those as well.
Okay, I
That's what-
misunderstood you. Okay,
yeah,
I
okay.
agree.
And I
Okay,
think
I agree.
Peter and Councilmember Barentine is reminding me that Peter did say that would be part of the discussion. So I think we're covered with the questions.
Sorry, I misunderstood what you were trying to say. Great, I think we're all there. Finished, city manager? Yep. City attorney? All right, thank you. This meeting's adjourned. See you all next Monday, or Thursday night for some.